G'day, May 40 here. Donald Trump is the new president of the United States. This is Inauguration Day, and the last thing that Joe Biden did in office was at 11:40 this morning. All right, in the last few minutes that he's in office, he pardons all his family, his brother's wife, etc. Like all his family from any crimes that they may have committed when there aren't any charges against them. And then in his last 24 hours, he gives out all these preemptive pardons, and he pardons far more people than have ever been pardoned before, if you don't count Jimmy Carter's mass pardons of people who didn't report for draft duty in Vietnam. But aside from that, Joe Biden has just gone to town, commuting punishment for murderers, for child abusers, for the worst people, and extending preemptive pardons before any charges were brought against Anthony Fauci or Mark Milley or Liz Cheney. This has never been done before, and this is not going to rebound to Joe Biden's benefit, to the Democrats' benefit. It seems like a terrible precedent to just start preemptively pardoning people before there are any charges made. And that he snuck it out in the last few minutes of his term, right? Well, Donald Trump is giving his inaugural address. He wanted to do everything he could to try to distract attention from what he was doing, which is not a good sign. If you're using the moral barometer, what would this look like on the front page of the New York Times, hoping that Donald Trump's inauguration will detract attention from what you're doing? Not a good sign when you're trying to hide something. So Donald Trump gave a solid inaugural address, unlike many of the policies that voting, such as the federal government will only see two genders, right? Male and female. Wish he'd said sex, right? Male and female. But at least we can get away from all the trans nonsense in federal government paperwork. He's doing away with DEI in the federal government, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot of good things in the inaugural address, but it wasn't a compelling address to listen to. Then he went down to Capitol Hill Rotunda and spoke to donors and various politicians, and then he just spoke off the cuff. Then he was hilarious. Then he would speak in an off-the-cuff, offhand, disarming manner that no other American president would ever speak. He speaking to Steve Scalise, who got shot up in 2017, and talked about how after Steve Scalise was shot, doctors had never seen so much blood. And he essentially said that during the first week after he nominated J.D. Vance, he wasn't quite so sure about the pick. Well, I loved the J.D. Vance pick from day one, and pretty much everything that J.D. Vance has done since then has been great, in my opinion. I think J.D. Vance is impressive, and his impressive nature demonstrated itself in particular in the vice presidential debate when he just wiped the floor with Tim Walz. There is an enormous upside to J.D. Vance because he is so smart. And I really like his wife, Aisha, of Indian descent. And normally when I see a middle-aged woman who's going gray and she's not coloring her hair, I think she has given up on a desire to look attractive for her husband. And I can prove it. When these women get divorced, they then go to great effort to look good, right? They go to the gym, they lose some weight, they color their hair. They go to great efforts to look good when they want to snag a man. But when women just give up on looking attractive for their man, it's not usually a good sign. But with Aisha Vance, there's just a practical, no-nonsense nature to her where it works, right? The gray in her hair works because she's no nonsense. And so, yeah, for most women, all right, they would look better in middle age and older if they color their hair, but it just fits with her personality. I just find her incredibly impressive. She's very intelligent. She met J.D. Vance at Yale Law School. She's given him 3 beautiful children. And there is some diversity that makes America better, right? When you bring in the best and the brightest, right? Highly impressive people like Aisha Vance, that makes the country better. And think about the example of tribes. right? Indian tribes throughout history have adopted members into the tribe. So I'm fine that there are ways that exceptional people can join the American nation. I just don't want open borders like we've had. I don't want a million immigrants moving in here. Usha Vance. I loved the YMCA last night. I watched the clip that MAGA is doing well in popular culture. I think that's great. And popular culture turned conservative, right? Way before the election. And I was just reading an essay on that. Tyler Cowen picked it up back in July. He's an economist, and he wrote an essay, a blog post back in July, all the different signs that popular culture is turning conservative. Now, I just read in Politico an argument for why Donald Trump's plans with regard to Greenland and the Panama Canal are not crazy. And I thought, wow, this guy's like a geostrategic expert, and I just enjoy Donald Trump talking about Greenland. He's hilarious talking about Panama and Canada, but now I'm reading something that says, oh, there really is something
Trump
to
barely won the popular vote. Why doesn't it feel that way?
Right, this is
Did
Ezra
more in
Klein.
it than Democrats have, with Musk's purchase of Twitter sitting at the apex of that project. And so the Trumpist right has gained disproportionate influence over vibes. The second factor is the corporate desire to shift right. Over the 2020s, corporations mastering social media means having a good team of social media content producers. Kamala Harris capably snarky team.
So Donald Trump's inaugural address, all right, it was written and he read it, and it just simply wasn't compelling. But his off-the-cuff remarks were incredibly compelling. It's kind of the difference between TV news and a smart podcast or a smart live stream, where with the live stream, with the podcast, with blog posts, with social media, you often get a more authentic voice. While with the TV news and with the New York Times, you get something that is more artificial and more performative.
Was just hired more or less en masse by the DNC. To the Trumpian right, mastering social media, and attention generally, means being yourself a dominant and relentless presence on social media and YouTube and podcasts, as Trump and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk all are. It's the politician as influencer, not the politician as press shop. There are Democrats who do this too, like AOC, but they are rare. Biden has no authentic relationship with social media, nor does Harris. They treat it cautiously, preferring to make fewer mistakes, even if that means commanding less attention. Since the election, I have heard no end of Democrats lament their media problem, and I've found the language telling. Democrats won voters who consume heavy amounts of political news, but they lost voters who don't follow the news at all. What Democrats have is an attention problem, not a media problem. And it stems partly from the fact that they still treat attention as something the media controls rather than as something they have to fight for themselves. I am not sure, in the long run, it will benefit Republicans to be so tied to Elon Musk's X. The politics that Democrats absorbed from Twitter in 2020 hurt them in 2024. Politicians who are too in touch with their online stands lose touch with normal voters. Their sense of the public, who it is, what it wants, deforms. But social media is humanity's vibes machine, at least for now, and Republicans have invested more in it than Democrats have, with Musk's purchase of Twitter sitting at the apex of that project, and so the Trumpist right has gained disproportionate influence over vibes. The second factor is the corporate desire to shift right. Over the 2020s, corporations...
I'm not so sure it's Trumpist influence exercising disproportionate over vibes. It's more like the vibes shifted. And that's reflected in Trump's victory.
Shifted left, driven by disgust with Trump, pressure from their workforces, and perceived pressure from their customers. This was reflected in the endless corporate pronouncements over this or that social issue, the many green pledges, the construction of vast DEI infrastructures, and a general aesthetic of concerned listening on behalf of executives. Whatever mix of sincerity and opportunism motivated these changes, it curdled into resentment in recent years. You can hear this in the interview Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist and Netscape co-founder who has emerged as a major Trump advisor, did with my colleague Ross Douthat. Companies are basically being hijacked to engines of social change.
Okay, so it was Tyler Cowen who nailed this back July 17th. The change in vibes, why did they happen? Because after January 6th in 2021, most people thought there's absolutely no chance that Donald Trump could ever become president of the United States again. So here are the reasons that Tyler Cowen back in July of last year saw a vibe shift. Trump and his team understand that we now live in a world of social media, and only a small part of the Democratic establishment has mastered this medium. The Trumpian right has been more intellectually alive and more vital than the progressive left, at least during the last 5 years. The deindustrialization of America has mattered more than people expected at first. It has longer legs. And many Trumpian and MAGA messages have been more in vibe with the negative connotation effects of, of our recent times. All right, the Democrats made a big bet that trying to raise the status of blacks would be popular, but they've had at best mixed results. The ongoing feminization of society has driven more and more men, including black and Latino men, into the Republican Party. The Democratic Party has become too much the party of unmarried, unhappy women. The Obama administration, both the reality and the perception, gave us rule by the intellectual class. People don't like that. Democrats and leftists come across as unhappy, much less happy than conservatives on average. Americans are noticing this. The relentless, egalitarian, flattening message of Democrats is not popular. And it translates in the real world into I am better than you are vibe. Americans pick up on this. All right, woke has proven deeply unpopular. Trans support is not a winning issue for Democrats, but they can't let it go. Immigration is out of control. Trump is right. Higher education is a Democratic stronghold, yet its clout and its credibility keeps falling over the past few years. Democrats made a big mistake going after big tech and trying to increasingly censor it. So big tech, the first time, is more and more supporting Republicans, and various developments in Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Israel did not help the Democrats. It just seems like the world is out of control. And so Joe Biden has given us the biggest foreign policy disasters of any presidential administration that I can remember, and completely unnecessary involvement with Ukraine, even provoking the Ukraine attack because of misguided American policy. And we haven't even gotten to defund the police, which is a stupid rallying cry on the part of the left. So the Democrats have done a lot to make themselves unpopular, and they are not willing to confront it. Trump is funny. He's one of the great American comics. Trump acts like a winner. And Biden just seemed out of it. So that was Tyler Cowen back July 17 in a blog post. Right? He nailed it.
Social revolution, he said. The employee base is going feral. There were cases in the Trump era where multiple companies I know felt like they were hours away from full-blown violent riots on their own campuses by their own employees. The biggest vibe shift Cowen misses in his list is the anger CEOs, particularly tech CEOs, came to feel toward their own workers and their desire to take back control. Trump's election acted as the pivot point for this trend, giving corporate leaders cover to do what they'd long wanted to do anyway. The election has empowered some top executives to start speaking out in favor of conservative policies, from tax cuts to traditional gender roles, the Financial Times reported. Announcement after announcement from major corporations pulling out of climate change compacts or dismantling DEI systems have been a vibes multiplier, creating the sense of a major shift happening at all levels.
So on Friday, I found this article in Politico, and Politico is generally on the left. It's not some kind of pro-Trump publication. But they published an essay. An expert in grand strategy thinks Trump is on to something. You want a future in which Canada defects to the EU, where Russia rules the Arctic and China runs Latin America? That's the default outcome of non-action. So I wasn't expecting to get a defense of Donald Trump's foreign policy in Politico, but here you go. Thomas Barnett, senior business strategist at Throughline Inc. Not sure I've heard of him before. The author of America's New Map, and he's on Substack, Thomas P.M. Barnett. So he mounts a defense of Donald Trump and his ambitions for Greenland and the Panama Canal. Right, our inbound President Donald Trump generates torrents of diplomatic angst with statements about Canada being America's 51st state. So it is funny with Trump being back in office, how attention span he takes. Right, Trump's making the national security logic of buying Greenland from our ally Denmark, snatching back the Panama Canal to counter China's growing economic footprint through our hemisphere. Where is all this expansionist energy coming from? How did Trump's America First isolationism suddenly morph into an America's First mergers and acquisition strategy? So when is it best just to be a nation state, and when do you want to become an empire? It all depends on the situation. When the situation changes, you may want your nation state to expand or to subtract, to merge into an empire. Sometimes a xenophobic police state will be the most effective way of surviving a particularly difficult time. And other times you want a more wide open, highly democratic society. So situation changes, then America has to change with it. So looked like the LA Rams had a damn good chance of beating the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday. Just one play go differently and they would have won that game. And then Buffalo, they got 3 turnovers, 3 gifts from the Ravens, and just barely snuck out. And all 4 of the surviving teams going into the conference championships this weekend, they all seem quite beatable. You've got Kansas City versus Buffalo. You've got Washington versus Philadelphia. And I don't think there is even a 7-point favorite. I don't know what the betting lines are, but I would suspect that the betting lines are well under a touchdown. Now, I expect Ohio State just to wipe out Notre Dame tonight in the college football championship. Okay, back to Thomas Barnett. Let's be clear on who Trump is. He does not come with a vision of his own making, but he has a stunningly effective capacity to sense fear within the ranks and weaponize it for political mobilization. Americans are scared and angry. They feel deeply uncertain about the nation's trajectory and globalization's increasingly fierce competitive landscape. We want someone strong and confident to tell us how we can be great again without assuming undue and unnecessary global responsibilities and a return to boomer-esque Cold War standoffs with both China and Russia. It is a tough needle to thread, but Trump's instincts are correct, and he's uniquely suited for the task. Right? There are 3 key trends that animate the globe right now. An east-west decoupling, B, a re-regionalization imperative along north-south lines that brings nearshoring production closer to home markets, C, a growing superpower clash animating all of these races, namely adapting to climate change, winning the energy transition, achieving AI supremacy. So we've got Donald Trump, the quintessential isolationist and climate change denier, negotiating American expansionism across North America into Canada, Greenland, Panama, and Americans may well trust his national security logic that we are now in a race for the Arctic with both China and Russia amid rising climate change. So Trump sees just enough of these changes and the fear that it generates to know the right plan of attack. So Americans are done building a world order and policing and defending a world order, which we oversaw from 1954 to 2008. And now we want an aggressively competitive approach in this new world, right? We want to be less the generous market maker and more the selfish market player. So the world's superpowers, the US, Europe, Russia, India, China, fear one another more and more. We sense an imperative in this de-regionalization, decoupling era, one that screams, get yours now before somebody else does. Russia shows that ambition in the nastiest way, sees Georgia and Ukraine. China does so with the Belt and Road Initiative, securing long critical supply chains across the world. With this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure building scheme, India is starting to do the same thing, pushing back against China's efforts to integrate South Asia into its global value chains and box in New Delhi's rise. Europe and the US, with Trump's return, seem destined to complete their conscious uncoupling like 2 self-absorbed celebrities whose career needs no longer jibe. And just as Russia sought to put the pieces back together of its empire, we now spot the same acquisitive rumblings within the West. So Trump has long argued that Europe and Canada both owe America vast sums of money for defending them for decades against the Soviet-Russian threat. Now implies that America deserves Greenland as compensation for that strategic debt. He argues that we will do a better job of developing and defending Greenland than tiny Denmark. And that makes sense. Now, The Economist out of London calls for the European Union, which has just cut a landmark trade deal with South America, to now invite Canada into its economic union. So if that deal makes sense for the European Union, why does it not make similar sense for the United States when it comes to Canada and Greenland? So together with Alaska, Greenland and Canada comprise North America's crown jewels when it comes to an Arctic increasingly revealed by climate change. So the warming Arctic possesses 1/3 of the world's remaining hydrocarbon reserves, oil, natural gas, along with prodigious amounts of minerals such as nickel, zinc, rare earths, critical to national security and the energy transition. So do you think Canada and Greenland needs help in standing up to Russia and China's aggressive ambitions across this crucial landscape? Of course. Or how about China's recent emergence as a primary trade partner and source of investment throughout South America? The Chinese are more than happy to beggar our neighbors of energy, minerals, and food, while climate change devastates vulnerable economies in the years ahead. Knowing full well that vast numbers of climate migrants escaping desperate situations will head to North America and not to China. So we are now entering a decades-long zone of turbulence that I described in my 2023 book, America's New Map, Restoring Our Global Leadership in an Era of Climate Change and Demographic Collapse. Our world system and its major players are being compelled to evolve at warp speed. Just like species are compelled by climate change to evolve at 1,000 times normal speed. So sometimes decades of significant action will occur within a week, and other times many decades will go by and nothing significant will happen. So animal species, plant species are compelled by climate change, by whatever forces are disrupting their world to evolve much more quickly. So globalization is being similarly stressed by a collision of history, twisting transformations ranging from a birth, death, dearth in the West, rapid aging across the global North, to the drought-driven strangulation of agriculture across the global South, to AI's profound destruction of jobs, just as the global South seeks to cash in on its demographic dividend and achieve deep integration in global value chains. So until now, globalization's integrating forces have unfolded largely along east-west lines. Now, thanks to climate change, our planet's lower latitudes closer to the equator will suffer extreme environmental devastation and economic tumult. The North can build all the walls it wants, but the logic of the North to South political integration will prevail, echoing the European Union's logic in the integration of former socialist states following the Cold War. So perhaps it's better to preemptively integrate these other states than suffer long-term disintegration. So here's the national security kicker. All that north to south integration is really an economic and technological race among the North's superpowers, the United States, European Union, India, Russia, China, to capture the long-term brand loyalty of the emerging global majority middle class, concentrating across the lower latitudes, increasingly tormented by climate change. The evolution of our world system thus requires a strong empire-building phase. There's nothing inherently superior about nationalism rather than empire. Right? Some situations require an empire. Other situations, you're better off as a strong nation state. So the tech bros understand what's happening. So does the Kremlin and the Chinese Communist Party. Now, Trump seems increasingly locked in to this means to establish his legacy. The real estate mattered America, but also made it bigger. It's everything, everywhere, all at once. So if you want a successful grand strategy, it's all about flowing with reality and with changing situations, with history's tides, instead of swimming against history. That's how you expand your ranks, more people, more territory, more member states, while denying that same growth to your rivals. This is the world we live in now. It's a super competitive moment. By mid-century, we will all be living in somebody's slice of our multipolar world. Washington needs to fully commit to making that future world, as much of it as we can effectively integrate, American in its ethos and its rules versus something else. America remains the most powerful nation on earth, both in economic and military and cultural terms. We are the kernel code of today's global market. Our rules set the rules of free trade, democratic rule, collective security projecting across the world. But now we have firm authoritarian pushback from China and Russia. The best way to ensure the future is to reopen the United States to new member states. This is the ultimate trump card in a superpower brand war. This ambition and this responsibility should define our patriotism this century. We get better by getting bigger, just as we have through the vast majority of our history. Trump points us in the right direction. Do you want a future in which Canada defects to the EU, Russia rules the Arctic, China runs Latin America? Because that will be the default outcome of our non-action. So Justin Trudeau is right when he says Canada will never become America's 51st state. But what if it became America's 51st through 59th states? Would that be enough political power and standing for Canadians to choose over admission into the EU? What about Canada getting 18 Senate seats and more congressional districts than California's 52? Right? That's a respectful offer. Greenland holds 2 seats in Denmark's 179-member parliament. Does that strike you as more empowering than 2 seats in the U.S. Senate? How about a $57 billion buyout package that makes every Greenlander an instant millionaire? So we live in volatile and uncertain times. The best way to shape the future is to create it yourself rather than letting others take the lead. And Trump is right in taking the lead in these deals. Right? Trump, perhaps more than any other American political leader, recognizes that America's strategic future will be marked by North-South and hemispheric integration. All right. Trump has zeroed in on the most disruptive outcome of climate change, mass migration from the global South to the global North. America and Canada can pretend that we can wall ourselves off from that turbulent future, but that is a cruel fantasy. Better to move America's borders further north and south than to suffer that inescapable pathway. Donald Trump may seem as unlikely a messenger from this future as Nixon was during the height of the Cold War, but the logic will grow only more formidable over the years.
Of American society. Perhaps the clearest example was Mark Zuckerberg's almost ceremonial embrace of Trumpism at Meta. No more third-party fact-checking and no more DEI programs. Zuckerberg sits at the helm of what is the largest vibe-tracking arc.
So I think I understand why Mike Johnson always looks so happy and healthy. He's got a gorgeous wife, and he's been married for 25 years. He's married to a stunning, tall blonde. All right, this is Ezra Klein in the New York Times.
Architecture in human history, and he could not have built that. He would not have built that if he was not himself exquisitely sensitive to changes in social sentiment. He knows which way the algorithms are trending. I interviewed Zuckerberg in 2018 as he was still processing the backlash from the...
All right, some conversation about Amy Klobuchar. So I don't think there's any politician whose public presentation is so dramatically different from who she is. So she presents herself as this, wonderful, norms-respecting, courteous, considerate public figure. But she treats her staff horribly, just like Kamala Harris treats her staff horribly. So here's a story, New York Times, February 22nd, 2019. Senator Amy Klobuchar was hungry, forkless, and losing patience. An aide joining her on a trip to South Carolina in 2008 had procured a salad for his boss while hauling their bags through an airport terminal. But once on board, he delivered the grim news. He had fumbled the plastic eating utensils before reaching the gate, and the crew did not have any forks on such a short flight. What happened next was typical. Ms. Klobuchar berated her aide instantly for the slip-up. What happened after that was not typical. She pulled a comb from her bag and began eating the salad with it. Then she handed the comb to her staff with a directive, clean it. So an interview with more than 24 former staff members. Amy Klobuchar is not just a demanding, but a dehumanizing and demeaning boss. Not just a tough boss, but volatile, high-handed, distrusting, and contemptuous. Treats people very poorly. There were some great moments on Trump's inauguration, and one of them was when the music failed for America the Beautiful.
You know the words, help me out here.
Carrie Underwood.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Okay, what have I got here? Yeah, this is this is how genocides begin. First, they ban tampons from men's bathrooms. All right, that's one of the culture changes at Facebook. Then the iconic gay disco band sings for Hitler. Right, great performance of YMCA by the Village People last night. So, New York Times on Biden's pardons versus Donald Trump. So, this is the New York Times. President Biden moved to issue pardons, preemptive pardons, to head off politically driven prosecutions. When Donald Trump does it, he's employing his power to override courts, juries, and prosecutors to apply his own standard of justice for his allies. And can you imagine? John Fetterman comes in hoodie and shorts, right? It's 20 degrees outside, and he shows up at the inauguration wearing hoodies and shorts. Mark Halperin's live stream was shut down by YouTube for policy violations. So it's good to stream on multiple platforms. Thank you, Elon, for restoring free speech to social media. And just think, 4 years ago, the conservative position on the transgender mania, that it is mental illness, was banned on all the major forms of social media 4 years ago. So we live in freer times now. Republicans are the free speech party. When Americans voted for Trump, they voted for free speech. And don't forget what Antifa and the violent left did at Trump's inauguration in 2017. And dozens of these violent arrestees all had their charges dropped by federal prosecutors. And it's weird that Joe Biden, who has the softest PhD possible in education, wants to be known as Dr. Joe Biden. Anyone who's not a medical doctor, but who wants to be called doctor, there's something wrong. And did you see Sonia Sotomayor traipse out with the rest of the Supreme Court at Trump's inauguration? Right? She looks like she's about to drop dead any minute. Chuck Schumer doesn't look too healthy either. Okay, we haven't played any Dennis and Julie for a while. That's because Dennis is paralyzed from the neck down and can't really speak. But
hello, everybody.
Julie and
Dennis
Sean
and Julie are
McConnell.
now temporarily Sean and Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Hartman. Sean McConnell here. Sean and Julie, it's great to be with you. We're so sorry that we missed a few episodes. As many of you know by now, there have been terrible
Julie looks great.
wildfires ravaging Southern California. And unfortunately, those wildfires particularly affected the two people who you are looking at right now, especially the one right in front of me. Sean, as many of you know, lost his home in the Altadena fires.
So Sean has a background with serious addiction issues and depression issues. And he has been the sound engineer for Dennis Prager's show for about 15 years now. He appears to weigh 400 pounds.
My parents live in Pacific Palisades. I grew up in Pacific Palisades, and we thought that we lost our home. And literally moments ago, I got news that we actually didn't lose our home. Our home was one of the few that survived. I mean, I think 80 to 90% of homes in the Palisades were destroyed. And my street, I mean, I was looking at videos on Twitter last week of my neighbors' houses going up in flames. We know that the house as close as 4 doors down to us was destroyed. So it's truly a miracle that ours survived, though of course we won't be able to live in it for quite some time because there's no water, there's no gas, there's no power, etc.
That's incredible. It's incredible. I've seen the devastation in Palisades, and
no, it looks
the
like
odds that your parents' house
It's
survived
crazy.
is remarkable.
It is crazy. I mean, I am so grateful because we didn't lose our childhood videos and photos. That's what was devastating me the most, the fact that those may have burned. So thank God that those are okay. But as I said, we won't be able to live in it because of the toxic air and lack of utilities. But you did lose your home.
I did.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, I've learned.
And I just took away from this episode how relative suffering is. So for Sean McConnell, the loss of his home was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to him. And I know people who've lost their kids, right? They had a child die. If you've lost a friend, if you lost a marriage, if you loved your parents and lost a parent, I can't imagine anyone who's lost someone that they loved would regard the loss of their home as the most devastating thing. So when I hear Sean talk about how the loss of his home was the most devastating thing that ever happened to him, it makes me think he's led an incredibly blessed life. I mean, how lucky must you be he looks to be in his 40s, to reach your 40s and have the loss of your home be the most devastating thing that ever happens to you. And then I don't understand, maybe you can explain it to me. So many people I know will never own a home in LA, right? It's just not financially possible for them. And so anyone who has owned a home in LA is just incredibly fortunate in life, right? They've been blessed in life. They've worked hard. They've done a lot of the right things, but they've also received substantial blessings. And then these people who've lost their home, explain to me, how are there hundreds of GoFundMes? Sean McConnell set up a GoFundMe. He's raised over $30,000. So if you own a home in LA, all right, you must have assets in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So how are people, how do you go out and put out a GoFundMe when you're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? Like, he must have been earning a 6-figure salary for more than a decade. How do you put out a GoFundMe? He would have home insurance, right? He would be worth his home equity, his home insurance is going to pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. How do you then set up a GoFundMe when you have hundreds of thousands of dollars? It strikes me as weird. I was pushed and pushed to do a GoFundMe, to set up time to write a one-man play, and I hated it. I put it up temporarily and then took it down. It just felt icky to me. And at the time, I was about $70,000 in debt. I just can't imagine having hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets and then setting up a GoFundMe for people to donate to you. Many of the people who are going to be donating to you have considerably fewer financial reserves than you do. It just strikes me as utterly incomprehensible to me. Like, I cannot picture setting up a GoFundMe, and I don't even have $100,000 in reserves. So if you got hundreds of thousands of dollars in financial reserves from owning a home in LA, how on earth do you have the chutzpah to set up a GoFundMe? Much of the money, much of the donations is going to come from people who are much less financially fortunate than you are. I must be missing something.
Learned a lot of things in the last week. And like you, my parents' house survived. They live right across from Eaton Canyon on Altadena Drive, and it's a miracle that their house survived. All their fencing and all the stuff around their house burned. Their neighbor's house partially burned, and you can literally see where.
So Julie is Roman Catholic, but through the influence of Dennis Prager, she's become somewhat interested in Judaism. I was just swiping through J-Swipe the other day, and there was Julie Hartman on my J-Swipe. Right, J-Swipe is the Jewish version of Tinder.
Where we have some pictures, and we'll have Brandon put them in there, where the fire burned right up to the back of their garage and stopped. I don't know. And I've been having a hard time evoking politics or God when it comes to this, because what am I supposed to believe? That God saved your parents, saved my parents, but burned me? I don't know what to say. And I suppose that's possible. And the whole political thing between Trump and Newsom and water and reservoirs and
Karen Bass.
When you lose everything, those things take a back seat, I guess. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm sure there's plenty of discussion for all that and time for that. The more immediate issue is there are a lot of people that are devastated by this. And
so when I lost my 20s to chronic fatigue syndrome, when I was basically bedridden from February of 1988 until January of 1994, nothing since has particularly bothered me. Right, compared to going through that, nothing has bothered me. In ninth grade, my best friend, he died. A tractor overturned and killed him, and so many people I've known have died. People that I was close to, that I haven't owned a home, so therefore I cannot lose a home. But once someone you've loved has died, I don't understand how then the loss of the structure and the home that you lived in could even come anywhere close to that.
It's going to be a long time before they're able to recover. And even in my situation, I feel blessed. I feel lucky that my parents still have their house. That gives me something to look forward to. There are a lot of people that just lost their house and they're in a hotel and they don't know where they're going. So
Now, I perfectly understand if your favorite car gets a scratch and you're a man and you start crying, right? I understand how we invest ourselves in our homes, in our art, in our live streams. So I don't begrudge anyone a sense of devastation, and I would never mock anyone, and I would never challenge anyone who's just absolutely devastated by losing something that's precious to them. But I would think that once you've suffered the loss of somebody you love, that the loss of physical space and physical objects could not compute to that love, to that loss of someone, a child, a spouse, a family member, a friend who died. After you've experienced that, I don't get the devastation. Right. To me, devastation indicates that you have led an incredibly blessed life.
I do feel lucky. I've also, I don't know how many times I've said this week, Salem has been so gracious and they set up a GoFundMe for me. And,
well, his GoFundMe shows him as the organizer. So maybe they set it up. He's but it's raised over $30,000 for a guy. If he lost his house, I presume he's got insurance, home insurance. He'd have to, I'm sure he's paying off a mortgage. So he must have hundreds of thousands of dollars from that home. How do you then ask people for money? I don't get it.
People all over the country that I know, that I don't know, from high school to now, have reached out, and I had.
But what if so many of them are less financially fortunate than you are? What if they are earning less money, have fewer financial assets than you do? Isn't there something in you that feels ashamed or bad about accepting their money? I would find it absolutely excruciating. I cannot imagine if the situations were reversed that I'd be down with a GoFundMe. Hey guys, I've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets. I've held a secure job for over 15 years where I earn six figures with pretty good benefits. And I've set up a GoFundMe because my house burned down.
I had to turn off the alerts for the GoFundMe because every time I would get one, it would make me cry. There's been so much loss and so much love all at once, and it's either one would be enough to break you. And I took some time, and I'm still healing. And
so if someone feels broken because their car got scratched, or I get it. Like when my beloved Volkswagen was damaged, all right, it ripped me up inside. It was emotionally painful. but it doesn't compare to the pain from losing a human being who you loved.
No matter how I feel, I still think about everyone else in a worse situation. So
I'm not down with the whole e-begging thing. Right? I don't like it. And to the extent that I've done it on my live streams, it was to accommodate someone else that I was live streaming with, or it was kind of a joke to me. I mean, I feel blessed. I just can't imagine this whole e-begging thing, which is just so widespread among people who are more financially fortunate than 80% of the population, and they're out there fundraising from people less financially well off than they are.
I love the community of Altadena, and I knew that living there, but I didn't really think about it until everything was gone. It's a great community, and I would like to live there again, but it's going to be a long time. Much like the Palisades, whole neighborhoods just
Gone.
decimated, and there's no rhyme or reason to one house on a street surviving and all the rest being gone, or vice versa, all the houses on one street and one house gone. That's what happened on my street. All the houses are gone except for one, and I'm not sure how to make sense of that, other than to say,
how to make sense of that? I mean, how did you make sense of that? Did you know anyone who knew someone who was murdered? Did you ever know anyone who had been killed? Like, compared to like life and death, people being slaughtered, right? People losing their mother, their father, their child, their spouse, their best friend, that maybe much of their kibbutz was slaughtered by terrorists. The destruction of these physical structures, just I get why it would be upsetting, but it just shows how relative suffering is. Because if you've loved somebody you love, how do you go into such paroxysms of grief over a structure?
I got off of work on Tuesday, and I went home, and I was receiving phone calls from my mom, who had been evacuated because they live towards the end of where the Eaton Canyon fire.
And I tip my yarmulke to Sean McConnell and to Julie Hartman. This is compelling, and this is raw, and this is honest, and I thank them and I respect them for being so emotionally vulnerable, so open, just so raw, telling us what's going on, putting themselves out there.
Started, and this happened a couple years ago, and it just darkened the skies and made it hard to breathe, and I wasn't affected by it other than that. And so that's what I thought was happening again. I got home.
You know what also makes it hard to breathe? Weighing over 400 pounds.
And my mom was in my driveway, and she had packed some clothes and toiletries and the dogs and the stuff the dogs need and my medicine. And I had about 10 minutes. And at that point, I was worried about them. I was worried about their house burning. It seemed pretty obvious their house was going to burn. So I grabbed what I thought I needed to help them get through this.
Bob made a good comment earlier. The narrative of the West since World War II has been that national borders are sacred. Now the United States, Russia, China, and Israel are keen on annexing new land. Europe's ruling elite once again revealed as morons. So that which is sacred one day is not sacred the next day. And all constructions of the sacred depend upon a particular hero system, and hero systems will often have to change to accommodate changing circumstances.
And that my evacuation was just a formality. So I grabbed a laptop and a backup battery power bank. And it's surreal because I think back to looking at items in my house thinking, what should I grab? What should I not grab? What do I need? What do I don't need? I never thought when I was grabbing things that'd
be the last
that
time.
would be all that I would own. But again, I'm alive. The dogs are alive. The Jeep is.
Bell says, Luke is optimized to ignore me 99.9%. I never ignore you, bro. I read everything that you write. Now, I remember the final campaign evening of the Donald Trump 2020 campaign where it looked like he was going to lose, and it closed in Michigan. I had a few tears, but I thought that was the end of Donald Trump in political office. So it made me incredibly happy to see his formidable comeback. I was not expecting it until until the political persecution mounted, right? Until they raided Mar-a-Lago and they charged Donald Trump with all these felonies in New York and then charged him with three other cases, right? Only then did Donald Trump become a viable candidate. So prior to the Mar-a-Lago raid, which I think was something like April of 2023, I wasn't expecting second Donald Trump term.
Is alive.
The Jeep.
Everything I own fits in the Jeep. So,
Well, Sean, we love you so much.
I was lucky enough to get to a hotel. I know you guys love me, and I've felt that love from you and
love
from
you so
everybody,
much.
and that does help. It gives hope. And you and I have talked, not to get away from the fire, but in the midst of all of this,
It gives hope. My God, it's like Barack Obama's campaign, like hope and change for the freest, most prosperous, most filled with opportunity nation state in the world. And Barack Obama's campaign is hope and change, hope in a land just awash in opportunity. It just strikes me as bizarre.
you and I both agreed, and this is when we thought your parents' house was gone, and there was very good likelihood that it was, that you and I would much rather lose our houses than go through what Dennis and Sue are going through. And I did talk with Sue, and she agreed. She just wrote back, me too. And so that's what I mean. No matter what I'm going through, I'm okay. And I know there's people going through much tougher situations. It's also hard, and maybe we can talk about this. I'm used to helping people, and I'm not used to being helped. And that's a hard thing for me.
I know. I actually was about to say that.
And I've had to learn that. So to get back to the story, we're in the hotel.
Look, Sean McConnell's greatest problem is not his house burning down. It's that he weighs over 400 pounds and that he has allowed this, I presume, for much of his adult life. So often people get incredibly sad and dramatic and heartbroken over things that are not nearly as pressing and as important than other things, such as just being this morbidly obese. But it's easier to focus on the house burning down than to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize, hey, I've got a problem. I've got some kind of emotional addiction to eating. I've got various health problems related to that. So much easier just to blame the house burning down, right? When you're burning down your own life, Sean, you're burning down, you've been steadily burning down your own life, operating at such a morbidly obese level for, I would assume, much of your life. That's the big problem, right? This morbid level of obesity that you carry, right? That's what's going to kill you any day, right? Your home is trivial compared to what you're doing to yourself, walking around weighing over 400 pounds.
My sister from the Bay Area was lucky enough to book us a room in a hotel, which was very difficult at that time. And we were watching the news like everybody else. And there was a reporter doing a story from in front of my mother's neighbor's house, and everything behind her was on fire. And so people...
It's like many women I know who are 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, and they obsess about their hair or this or that makeup or this or that clothing. Look, you're obese, all right? You are not taking care of yourself, right? You have allowed yourself to become fat. You have become a fatty, but you would much rather distract yourself on this or that lipstick or this or that hairstyle or this or that outfit. When you're a fatty, right, you are revolting to your husband and to the people around you, and you have allowed yourself to become a fatty, revolting mess. Fix it. Deal with that.
People were sending us the video and calling in and to my mom and saying, we're so devastated. I'm sorry you lost your house. And so when Wednesday morning rolled around, I told my mom, I said, look, get in the Jeep.
So a friend of mine, he was fat. And one day he got out of his car and somebody yelled at him on a busy street, get out of the way, fatso. And it was so traumatic for him that he dedicated himself to losing weight. His name was Greg Kreitzer, Critser. He wrote a great book on fat. He completely changed his life. He's now deceased. But sometimes someone rude might clue you to a very significant issue in your life that you just want to ignore and focus on other things.
we're going up there. I need to see. You can't just trust these news reports. And this was before they locked down the area, and it was probably stupid.
So this is Dennis Prager's sound engineer, and so he's also works as a sound engineer for Julie Hartman, her radio appearances, her live streams, etc. So these two have been working together for approximately 2 years or so.
But we went up there.
So Dennis Prager used to do a weekly show, Dennis and Julie, and then Dennis Prager got out of the shower around November 13, and he was walking over to the sink to get a razor, and he slipped on the wet floor and broke his neck and hasn't been able to speak ever since. He's paralyzed from the neck down.
And lo and behold, when we got there, the house was still standing. Like I said, the perimeter had been burned. And I spent the better part of that morning putting out areas that were still smoldering with the garden hose. A neighbor's tree had fallen and was still burning. I went over and put that out. And while I was doing that, I received a phone call from my place saying, it's all gone.
Oh, God.
So I don't give money to homeless people, right? I give money to certain charitable institutions, and I hope that there are wise people associated with these institutions who know how to help homeless people. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to give money to alcoholics, to drug addicts, and to people who can't stop stuffing their face, right? If you've got some kind of out of control addiction, whether it's to eating or to dating or to crystal meth or to Netflixing out of reality, right? No one can solve that problem, right? If your life is unmanageable, it's likely because you've got some kind of out of control addiction operating, and no other person can solve your addiction.
So we got my mom into the house and whatever she needed for her and my stepdad, and sent her back to the hotel. And my brother, who had come up to help, I looked at him and I said, we need to go. We need to go see my place, because you can't go off of people's words. You have to see things with your own eyes. I needed to see it. So we drove through the hellscape. I'll never forget what I saw. And I think anyone that witnessed that stuff will never forget it either. I've never been to war. God bless you if you have. Thank you for your service. That's the only thing I can use to describe it. You see power poles that are burning from the inside, and they have no base. And they're just swinging from the wires, and fallen trees, and the devastation where all you see are chimneys and everything's blackened, and people are just kind of milling around. There wasn't enough firefighters or police. They couldn't be everywhere all at once, and there was no way to secure everything. So we went down my street, and
so he's the organizer of this GoFundMe. I lost everything in the Eaton Canyon fire. I'm currently staying in a hotel with my dogs, my mom, and my stepdad. Miraculously, while the fire scorched the perimeter, my mom's house still stands, though it's uninhabitable. As a routine-oriented person, this loss has been overwhelming. It's not just stuff, and it's a lot to process. Your support means the world to me as I navigate this difficult time and I work to rebuild. So the goal was 30,000. He's raised 35,000 already.
That was really hard, because you see the faces of the people that live in the houses that aren't there anymore.
I know.
And we drove as far as we could. There was a big tree that had fallen and blocked the road. And we stopped the Jeep. And we got out, and all we heard was,
Sorry, that is so not what I was expecting you to say. Oh.
And we'll show a picture. We got out of the Jeep, and there were 7 goats covered in soot, all huddled together, just staring at my brother and I as if to say, what the hell do we do?
So I noticed people are obsessed with animals. They also, it seems like they haven't lost a human being that they've loved. Right? If you've lost a child, if you've lost a spouse, right? If you've lost someone you love, I can't imagine that you would then equally obsess over animals.
And they had...
I guess I got kind of the black attitude towards dogs and pets, right? For many white people, it seems like pets are an equal member of the family. While for black people, pets are pets.
Been loose. They had lived through that whole thing. I don't know how, but they were sitting there, and my brother said, we got to do something for these goats. And I just remember thinking, what the hell can I do for the goats?
They were probably looking at you like,
I just figured if they were hungry enough, they'd find grass. My head was...
Right, the well-being of goats, it doesn't really matter much.
The smell, the smoke, even with a mask, it was really hard to breathe. And so we walked the rest of the way up to where I used to live. And everything was gone. Nothing was taller than my kneecap. I could make out the tub and a pot that used to sit on the stove. And and then that's when my brother took that picture that I didn't know he took, that you see on the GoFundMe page. And so I saw it, and I'll never forget it. And we had to go because you can't stand in that stuff too long. And we drove back down through the chaos and realized the breadth and the depth of the devastation and how many neighborhoods have just been leveled by this fire. And
Right, someone could say all the same things about a computer virus destroying all the photos on their hard drive, or their favorite car is damaged, or their favorite painting gets damaged. Compared to the loss of people, right, I just can't get... It's just not... It's not in the same league.
Meant to you, and there have been so many Dennis and Julie listeners and Timeless listeners who have donated. I mean, the amount of people who've reached out to me asking me to...
I'd feel awful, right, if I was in Sean's financial position and all these people are giving... I'm e-begging and they're donating. It would rub me the wrong way. It seems to lack self-respect.
Resend it to them. I was actually just on the phone with a guest who is on Timeless, Solomon Schmidt. He is the child prodigy. He's 21 years old and wrote a biography of Alan Dershowitz, and he has a forthcoming one about Jake Rowling.
Yes, he
donated.
Great. Really?
He donated. I mean, just the amount of people. And so I'm on behalf of Sean. Thank you. Thank you. Because Sean, let me just say something about you. You are, what you said a few minutes ago is so true. You are one of the most giving, selfless people I have ever known. Sean, when I started...
And no one has ever said this about me. All right? I'm much more likely to be the recipient of books such as The Givers and the Takers by girlfriends who thought I was more of a taker.
Started out in radio 4 summers ago. And I was Dennis's intern, and then I came on the radio show once a week, and then at the end of the summer, Dennis was in Hungary, and he asked me to guest host his radio show. I was so honored and so nervous. I can't tell you how many hours I spent in that old, down the hall, not this studio, but down the hall, that old booth, sitting there and taking notes and talking with you and trying to learn. You were so helpful and gracious. I mean, any overtime, you know, like I would call you at night and we'd talk. I mean, you were so helpful. And you came in, and I'll never forget this. I don't even think you remember this. I show up, it's August 10th, 2021, and I'm about to guest host for Dennis at the age of 21. I'm so nervous. They're counting, you know, it's maybe 3 minutes until showtime. And I look through the glass and I see you making the sign of the cross and praying for me.
I was, yeah.
That was so touching to me. I can't tell you. I had tears shoot up, and then I thought, no, not now. Focus. I can't tell you how touched I was by that, because you didn't know me. You had no allegiance to me. You had no anything. I mean, it was, and you just, from the minute I met you, embraced me like you were my big brother, and you were so there for me. And by the way, what you may not remember, but I certainly remember too, is that apparently I did an adequate job, because later that day, Salem called me and they said, Mike Gallagher needs a guest host tomorrow morning. Do you want to do it? I'm like, I've been preparing for this.
Julie is studying for LSAT. She recognizes that live streaming is not the most solid career choice. So I would expect that she'll be heading off to law school soon.
Thing for, you know, weeks, and oh my gosh, can I do this on 24 hours notice? And I called Sean, and Sean said, absolutely, you do it. And I said, well, you know, I'm going to be with the producers in New York. You know, they're going to be remotely in my ear, but I'm so nervous. And I said, could you come in? And Gallagher starts at 6 a.m.
Right.
And you said, of course. Yeah. You didn't get paid for it. You didn't, nothing. You came in.
And I would not have come in, right? If I'd been in Sean's position, I don't think I would have come in.
I remember you trudging in at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
to be there for me.
Yep.
That's the kind of person you are.
Yep.
But I don't do things for people if they're capable of doing things for themselves. If there's some other producer who'll take care of it, right? I would not have come in that circumstance just to be emotional support.
And I will never forget that. I will never stop appreciating that. And so, Sean, in your time of need, please know that no one.
So I had a girlfriend who had the flu, and she wanted me to bring her crackers, but it was just highly inconvenient. And there was food around her. So no, I wasn't willing to drive 20 miles to bring her crackers. So she called an ex-boyfriend, and he was happy to do it.
The other day, shortly after the fires, and I told him, what happened. And when we didn't
Talking about Dennis Prager.
know yet about my house, but when I told him that your house was destroyed, the look of horror and concern on his face.
Dennis is incredibly empathic. He's among the most empathic people I've ever met.
Yeah.
Was something that I'll never forget. He was just so sad for you and so sad for our fellow Angelinos.
Is there?
So compared to losing a child or losing a spouse or having a friend who's murdered, to me, the loss of a house is like 1 out of 10 in importance, when losing your child or losing your spouse is 10 out of 10 in importance.
Is there any update on Dennis?
No, I
Same
mean,
stuff?
I'm sorry. You can't imagine how sorry I am, because I know every single episode I go,
Right.
I know everybody wants an update, but as I have said many times, and it's so frustrating, his condition is
Right.
such a long slog. Like I'm expect for the next 4 months. I'm not kidding.
When is the last time Luke had a beer? I tried drinking beer on the Saturday night of my high school graduation, so that would have been early June of 1984, and I hated it, and I haven't had any beer since. But if you put all the alcohol that I've ever consumed in my life, it would be the equivalent of 10 glasses of wine.
The same
Okay.
answer that I'm giving. It's
Okay.
just there's no update.
Right.
I wish there were. But anyway, we were talking, and I said to him, because at that, I think it was the 11th of January when I went there, and that was the day 2 months earlier that we filmed our last Dennis and Julie.
Mm.
And I sat there with him and I said, if someone could have come to us 2 months ago and said, and take the trinity of, we call ourselves the Trinity, Sean, Dennis, and Julie.
Yeah.
The three of us are really, really close.
Yeah.
If someone could have come in and said, one of you is going to become incapacitated, one of you is going to lose their home,
Yeah.
and the other is going to come damn close to losing their
Right.
home and lose their whole community,
Right.
we would have looked at each other like,
I
oh
know.
my God, we've been trying to promote truth, beauty, and goodness for the past few years. What happened? But you know what? And again, Dennis and I talked about this to the extent that he can contribute to the conversation.
Yeah.
And he said, what a dark time. He mouthed that. He said, what a dark time.
Wow.
And I said, I know. And I said, if someone, could have told us that, all of the people and all of the structures, and I so relate to what you're saying, because on the one hand, it is just stuff, it's just buildings. It sounds so weird, but watching my supermarket go up in flames, I was crying watching it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why do I have but knowing I'm not.
She was crying that the supermarket went up in flames. I don't begrudge her that. Women are more emotional, and I can understand why it would be so sad. But if somebody close to you had died, I suspect the emotional impact of a supermarket going up in flames would be considerably diminished.
Not going to walk down those aisles. It's weird, but that supermarket or that hair salon or that church, like those things were as much my home as my home.
Right.
And the people in their homes, that's home for me.
I identify with everything you said, except I don't have a wax lady.
Guess what? I love my wax lady.
Unlike most of America, did not have a break for COVID. I was considered media. The only difference I saw during COVID was the freeways were open. I went to work every day. I did not have a lockdown. And so COVID didn't affect me the way it affected other people. So of all the things I've been through in my life, this recent fire is the most devastating.
Wow. Out of everything he's been through in life, this fire is the most devastating. You have had such a blessed life, my friend.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to say this before I lose my train of thought, because we both can relate to each other that I am devastated that my grocery store is gone.
Yeah.
I'm devastated that the school and the church makes more sense. But these we understand this in the scope of God. And I said to Dennis the other day, we have these quiet moments when the nurses are not there, and it's just the two of us in the room. We really got to have our deep moments. And I said to him, "Why do you think this happened to you?" And he looked up, kind of, in his Dennis way, he thought, and then he looked right at me and he mouthed, "I fell." I fell.
Wow.
And it was so simple. And I know this is it's so simple yet so profound, but it was so simple yet so profound because...
I just remembered what I was going to say earlier.
Okay.
Good. I won't forget it. Go ahead.
Okay, good. And I fell. And I said, "Do you think, God caused this?" And he goes, "No." And I understood what he was saying. We have free will. We are affected certainly by our own free will, but we're also affected by others' free will. And so if you're driving down a highway and some other car is crazy and swerves and hits your car, maybe that's not your free will, it's your free will to get behind the wheel, but you are affected by other people's free will to swerve into you. Dennis, it was his free will to get out of the shower and walk across the wet floor to get a razor, and he slipped and fell. And so that was his answer. And in a way, at least for me, there's a comfort in if you are a Catholic, as we both are, if you're a Christian, you believe in the presence of an evil force, Satan, the devil, a conscious, animate force for evil that is goading you or that's contributing, to use a terrible analogy at this point, fueling.
So there's no notion of a devil in Judaism. There is no divine force outside of God. So this is a Christian perspective.
The fire of bad things. That is something that I struggle more with, if that is true. And I'll tell you something quickly that my uncle said to me. You know my uncle. He's a really smart, whip-smart guy, extremely thoughtful. And he's a Catholic, very devout Catholic. And I called him and I said, "Why do you think this happened to Dennis?" This was before the fires. And he said a fascinating answer. I actually told Dennis this answer. He said, "I think that the devil knew that Dennis was so formidable in his morality and his intellect that they couldn't corrupt his mind or his soul. So he, the devil, came at Dennis physically."
Wow.
And I told Dennis that. And Dennis was very touched because his intellect and his morality and his soul means the most to him.
Yeah.
And he was touched that my uncle was paying him that inadvertent compliment. But he also, he said he entertains that possibility. He said he wouldn't.
All right. If Dennis entertains that possibility, that's so far outside of Judaism that his religion is not Judaism, it's Pragerism.
Rule that out.
Wow.
Right. There's no notion of that in normative Judaism. I mean, this is the problem with in-group identity, is that you can believe things and someone will say something like, "Oh, the devil recognized that his soul was so strong he had to attack his body." That sounds incredibly profound within your particular hero system, but outside of that particular hero system, it just sounds self-indulgent and stupid. God forbid. Right, LA Mayor Karen Bass, no way she's recovering.
What went wrong? How was this allowed to get so bad? Was the state and the city, were they prepared for what's happened here?
I remember years ago there was an LA earthquake and I was watching the news coverage and a reporter went up to a town manager and said, "What went wrong here?" And I thought, well, the earth moved. And so what's happening now is the only thing that matters in this news cycle is blame. That is the only thing people are going to want to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about solutions. It's all about blame. The mayor really cannot recover from something like this.
She was out of the country.
She's out of the country in Ghana.
She slashed the fire department's budget.
Well,
by
right.
millions of dollars.
And I think that when you are a mayor, when you're somebody in this situation, the whole idea in politics is it's all about accepting credit for things you didn't accomplish and taking the blame for things you didn't cause. She is going to take all the blame. There's nothing that can be done about it. The one that's more interesting to me because it's more survivable is Gavin Newsom, because he wants to have a future. And what is going to be imperative for him is what the public, if he wants to run for office, is going to need to look at is how well he takes your beating. One of the things that voters are very interested in, they want to see.
So a question from the chat being that Julie Hartman is Catholic. Why is she on a Jewish dating app? She's not much of a practicing Catholic. She feels considerable attraction to Judaism, so she realizes that she needs to become more religious, but she doesn't know in which religion she'll follow. So she's kind of betwixt and between secularism, Catholicism, Judaism. Right? She's the equivalent of what, a religious bisexual?
How well you take it and whether you can endure taking it. And second, what he's going to have to worry about is bringing money to the state. That's really the focus. In terms of what the mayor can do, that is beyond anything I can possibly comprehend.
What are Gavin Newsom's odds of success at bringing money to the state? Already you've had the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, suggest that there should be conditions to any aid that comes along, and clearly this incoming administration is not friendly with Gavin Newsom and vice versa.
No, I don't think that the odds are great, but that at least he has odds. The mayor has no odds. There is no play there for her. For him, if he can get something to the state, it could work. The problem he's going to have is he's going to have tension between wanting to rebuild and environmentalists, who are his big constituency, who don't want to rebuild. And so it is an absolutely fraught situation, and you have somebody who wants to be president who external circumstances are really going to determine it more than anything he does.
You think he's going to be looking at the rebuilding process and saying,
Question from the chat. When Dennis passes away, will you sleep like a baby? I don't think I'll lose sleep. There'll be a part of me that's sad. He played a significant role in my life for a time, and then I moved on.
maybe we don't do it as much because the environmentalists help put him in the position he's in?
I think that that's a tension he's going to have to deal with. The problem is, how do you tell people who have lost their homes, well, we may not rebuild? I don't see how there's a win there. I mean, there's no option for them other than to rebuild. You can't just say, well, just move somewhere else. That's a little bit glib, and that's going to be a problem.
So I don't think about Dennis Prager, right? It's only when something relevant crosses my internet. So I'm not emotionally upset by his suffering. Like I feel bad for him, like I would if the same thing happened to you, right? I've never met Bob, but I'm as emotionally invested in Bob as I am in Dennis Prager. Now, Bob may very well disappear. He's disappeared in the past. He'll just go radio silence for a year, and when Bob goes radio silence next for a year, I'm not going to be losing sleep at night wondering how Bob is doing.
Can't dig out of.
More than a little glib, I think.
Yeah,
and then there are the questions that come back to why the reservoir there was empty, why the fire hydrants were empty. He's called for an investigation. How much patience will there be with that playing out, just given...
Right, there's only so much empathy and care and concern that we're all capable of. And so for me, it's primarily directed towards my family, extended family, friends, community. Those people are the burning core of my life.
The acrimony that's already built up.
Well, that's right. And no matter how much a client under attack wants to get out of the blame situation, I have seen no matter what chess move they make, it always comes back to who takes the fall. And that is going to be the news cycle we are going to be in for a very, very long time.
How do you think of the contrast between what Gavin Newsom is doing right now and between what the governor of Florida, DeSantis, had done when hurricanes have devastated his state? Because you can look at this and say, okay, there are natural disasters, acts of God, things we can't control, but there are human responses to these things.
Well,
and the
there
response
are.
has been pretty different.
I think that there's been greater competence in Florida. I think that they're more used to it. And I also think that you have a leader there who, while controversial, is very, very camera ready in the sense that he looks like somebody who is in absolute command. I never really understood why George Bush got in so much trouble over Katrina, because there was really only so much you can do in a natural situation like that. But unfortunately, what the story becomes...
Also, I had never seen such pathetic Americans as the people of New Orleans after Katrina. They just seem completely incapable of doing anything for themselves, let alone each other. They just seem to lie there waiting for the government to come along and take care of them. Very different from the attitude that I see demonstrated by Los Angelinos. They lose their home in a fire, and they don't just lie on the floor waiting for the government to take care of them.
Is the handling. It is always about handling.
I don't think I was clear enough. I've never seen such pathetic Americans as I saw in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Just the lying there on the street, when you're going to come and take care of me and bring me food and bring me water and give me shelter and take care of all my needs. It was depressing how pathetic they were.
They didn't handle it. There's a vacuum. There's a vacuum, and they didn't address it. And if you let, the chips fall where they fall, it's exactly what happened to poor W back then. And probably should have never come out and said that Brownie's doing a heck of a job.
I have no patience for people who ask for help for things that they can take care of themselves, right? I was part of an online chat, and there was a guy there who was just constantly asking for all sorts of elementary internet help that he was perfectly capable of figuring out himself. And he would get furious when I'd point out to him, you are perfectly capable of doing this for yourself. And I would encourage other people in the chat, don't help him here. Let him take care of himself. Right? It's incredibly unattractive to me. And there's never an escape. Right? Once someone gets their hooks into you to do things for them that they are perfectly capable of doing for themselves, they then never graduate to adulthood and standing on their own 2 feet. They are nothing but a pain. Right? Whether someone's asking you to Google something that they're perfectly capable of Googling themselves, right? When someone's asking you to show them what's on a particular account on Twitter because they're blocked from that person on Twitter, when they could just use an anonymous browser or a second account, it never ends. It never, ever, ever ends if you ever allow someone to persuade you to do things for them that they are perfectly capable of doing for themselves. And I just don't see donating to GoFundMe's for people who are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. To me, it's obscene. It's a lack of respect for yourself, a lack of respect for other people, that, hey, you have less than I do. You want to donate to me? It's obscene.
But they mishandled the whole thing. But you're right.
But I think it's still a hurricane. And you're still dealing with an act of God. There's a reason why force majeure clauses exist, because you're dealing with somebody beyond control. That's why I still find it humorous when I think of the reporter asking the town official in L.A. in 1994 what went wrong here. The tectonic plates moved.
Right. Let's talk.
Okay, there's a right-wing podcast called the Ruthless Podcast, and it's a bunch of political pros of the Mitch McConnell variety. And here they're talking about Gavin Newsom fiddles while California burns.
It is not the city councilman's job to figure out how, in the event of a natural catastrophe, your state responds to something. That rests entirely with the governor. And the fact that he's standing in front of a burning home being like, I don't know, these guys are going to have to figure that out.
Your alderman's going to figure that out, not me, the chief executive of the state.
At the same time, the LA Times is reporting that the largest reservoir is offline since February. Like, that should be a critical piece of information. The governor clearly didn't know it.
His concern hasn't been about, this is the basics. Your very first job as the governor of a state is make sure people don't die. That's like job number one before you start thinking about what kind of legislative priorities I have. It's like the president of the United States. You're the military. You're the chief executive. The very basic thing as governor you're supposed to do is make sure people don't die. And he's like, we're all trying to figure out whose job it is.
I don't know.
Let it burn. That's their thinking.
But like, after all of this, they're like, all right, we're going to raise some money for the effort. A noble cause, obviously. People are raising money, trying to give it to charities. And again, I don't want to malign their intent. I don't know what it is. It's how they execute this thing that is entirely consistent with what you know about progressive Democrats and the way they handle things. Look at this. Let's get this graphic up, if you wouldn't mind, Spaghetti. So this is their thing. It says, if you want to help those, and they're linking to their own interview with the governor. And they say, if you want to help, again, I'm not even to the meat.
We're optimizing for clicks and views.
I'm not even to the meat of this. They're like, here we just did like a thing, and like, instead of being like totally altruistic about, we're gonna RT our thing,
right?
And then we're gonna put, if you want to help those impacted by California wildfires, please donate at votesaveamerica.com/relief. Okay, all right. So the New York Post jumps on this fairly quickly, and they say observers online quickly pointed out that ActBlue takes a portion of all the donations as a processing fee. ActBlue claims to charge a flat rate of 3.95% to each donation to cover the processing costs. The Post has contacted ActBlue for comment. ActBlue is a controversial platform. Last year, congressional Republicans flagged scores of transactions on ActBlue have been flagged as potentially suspicious or fraudulent. Newsom himself has refrained from linking to ActBlue fundraiser directly. However, he went to the liberal Pod Save America podcast last week, which encouraged users to use the Dem fundraiser as well. Now, we'll get to Newsom because he then updated all of that.
There's even more.
He updated all
There's
of that.
no end.
He had his own thing. He had his own thing. But here's what, like, again, I'm just going to, you fill in the blanks on what you think the intent of all this is. But this is an organization that was set up, Vote Save America, seems pretty clear, right? It's a nonprofit status, and they do things like registering voters and providing people information. But we've also reported on the Variety program that the Democrats are way ahead of Republicans in all of these C3 and C4 organizations, where they collect a whole bunch of data on folks, and they thereby spread the entire breadth of the small dollar giving universe that all resides in Act Blue. And so there's just more available small dollar donors for Democrats than there are for Republicans. One of the reasons for that, you're super unscrupulous. And I'm not saying that this was the intent. I don't know what the intent was. I'm just saying what they did by putting all of this on Act Blue. Think for a minute. So the Republican corollary to all of this is win red.
Yeah.
Think for a second if you had a hurricane bearing down on Florida, just decimated an entire community. And rather than directing somebody to the Red Cross or directly to local organizations on the ground that are doing all that, which they have said that's what they intend to do with the money that goes into their thing. But rather than do that, like all of a sudden Ron DeSantis was like, well, if you go to my campaign website and you type in all your information, including your email address, your phone number, your address, and everything else, I'll make sure 100% of the money goes there. Now, even if it does, even if 100% of the money does go there, there's a tangible asset that most political digital marketing firms pay like $1 or $1.20 in order to get each name on their list. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
like an acquisition.
Right. I mean, it's like lead generation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so I agree. It's like, look, I don't know what their ultimate intent with all of this is, and I'm sure all the money will go to these charities, and the processing fee. Yeah, I mean, every donation processor charges a processing fee because that's what it costs to work with the credit card companies. Like,
yeah, it's less about the 3.95% thing as it is about the housing.
It's like it's just thirsty, as the kids might say. It's kind of thirsty.
And
it's
here's
thirsty to surf off of a tragedy and use it to like build a list that you control. It's like if you really wanted to help, just send a link to the Red Cross, send a link to the organizations that you want to support. You don't have to create this Rube Goldberg experiment on Act Blue.
Well, there's only two things, right?
Yeah.
It can either be that you are unintentionally digesting all of the information that Good Samaritans provide you that can later be used for Democrat partisan purposes, or you're doing it intentionally.
So that's the thing. So on Newsom's thing, when you typed in your info, people posted the screenshots of it. At the bottom in a tiny little font, there was an automatically checked box that said, I want to opt in for emails from Gavin Newsom's campaign.
There it is. Like Newsom's is even worse than the Pod Bros. But like the thing is that this is a very easy decision. You want money to get from A to B. You want to use your platform to help generate activity for a good cause. Why are you a middleman?
Yeah, why are you adding more friction to that process?
Why would you need to do it? Right? It's either you want credit for driving it because it goes through your operation and you can ultimately cut the check. You PodSave bros can cut the check. Or worse. Right? And you have nefarious purposes that you want the actual information that you can help.
You could have just set up a GoFundMe. You know, if you if you wanted that,
which is what Trump did for the people in North Carolina.
Right. If like you want to set a goal of like what your audience can donate, you know, like set up a GoFundMe.
Can you imagine,
do it that way.
Can you imagine after North Carolina and the devastation that's still happening, by the way?
It's still horrible. People getting thrown out of their temporary housing.
Can you imagine that after that, instead of a GoFundMe, that Trump was like, you can just go to TrumpVance.com.
Yeah.
Send me the money, I'll take care of it. Can you imagine the outrage?
That's the insanity of this.
But that's essentially what these guys have done. Newsom in particular. Now, I know, like a PodSave bros, I don't know.
Okay, Britt Hume is one of my favorite commentators here on Fox News. Let's get a little burst here from Britt.
Chief of Staff is setting up shop, as well as Alina Habba, who took over Kellyanne Conway's old job with the new Trump administration. Britt Hume is still with us. Britt, it is a different administration. It has different folks who seem to have been preparing for this moment for 4 years.
Yeah, it's a more seasoned group and a more seasoned president. Could I just mention something about this day, Brett? I've thought about this often. When Bill Clinton was inaugurated, I was covering it from the west front of the Capitol where the festivities were, and I was chatting with a Republican congressman named Jerry Lewis from California. He wasn't any more partisan than the next guy, but he was a Republican through and through, and he was in festive spirits. He was in a great mood, and I asked him what he was so happy about, and he said, "Oh, this is a great day. This is America. This is how we do this here. Not every country does it this way. This is a wonderful day." And I thought, you know, he's absolutely right. And I watched these proceedings today, Brett, and I got to say, it hit me emotionally more than I would have imagined. We do this. Now, look, these are divided times. There's still hard feelings. I get all that. But look at the way the Democrats on this day carried out their roles.
It keeps us together as a nation despite of all of our divide.
So why do we do it this way, Brett? Why do people do these gracious things? Why do people behave as they do on this day? It is out of respect for the Republic. And it is a reminder of what Alexander Hamilton famously said, I think it was in 1788, as they were debating the Constitution. He said, "Here, sir, the people govern." And that is out of respect for the people. And the fact that in this case, unmistakably, the people, maybe narrowly, but convincingly, voted for this man, and the entire political establishment takes note of that. Not everybody behaves as graciously as these members of the Democratic Party have today, but they knew what they were doing.
But, Britt, that is exactly what we heard in the speech this morning, that President Trump is saying, you know, you, the people, you do govern this nation, and it's gotten out of whack. And that has also been one of his major motivating factors throughout his political career over the last 8 years.
Yeah, so how would you like to have been Joe Biden sitting up there on that platform with President Trump describing the events of recent years in such sharp terms? He just sat there and took it because that's what you do. And then, of course, you had the four of them walking out to the helicopter there in that ceremony that's always carried out every time this happens, and sending the Bidens off. They did it for the country. You know, they did it because this is what we do, and it's very important that we do it this way.
You know, it's also unique, Britt, that it was inside the Capitol Rotunda, and, you know, that stage was on the west side of the Capitol Rotunda, in between the statues of Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses S. Grant. And all of the statues in that rotunda are presidents, except Martin Luther King and one for women's suffrage. But just that moment and that sight and the difference of it carried its own gravitas.
I could not agree more, Brett. And, you know, John Philip Sousa's work gets it's a real workout on these occasions.
Okay, got some clips lined up here. Yeah, what the heck was Elon Musk giving a Roman salute here to Donald Trump? And then this is when the ketamine finally kicks in. Where Elon Musk starts feeling it during the inauguration. And here's more from Elon.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah! And this was no ordinary victory. This was a fork in the road of human civilization. Okay. This you know, there are elections that come and go. Some elections are, you know, important, some are not. But this one this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured. Thanks to you. We're going to have safe cities, finally, safe cities. Secure borders, sensible spending, basic stuff. And we're going to take Doge to Mars. I mean, can you imagine how awesome it will be to have American astronauts plant the flag on another planet for the first time? How inspiring would that be? You know, there's always problems in life. You know, there's this problem, solve that problem. But you know, there need to be things that inspire you. There need to be things that make you glad to wake up in the morning and say, I'm looking forward to the future. Yeah.
Okay, remember that killer, that bloke in the United Kingdom who killed 3 girls who were learning ballet? And this was the only picture of him, this sweet-faced little choir boy. It was basically the only photo released of the killer before today. Here's what he looked like. This is his mugshot. So quite a different look than the one that the news media has been presenting us with. Right, the news media gave us this sweet-faced little choir boy, and here's how he really looks. Okay, what else do I have lined up for you? All right, Tim Dillon had some wisdom about the whole Gaza situation and the hostages and their release.
Actually. And yesterday, I think they killed a bunch of people that were celebrating the ceasefire. That's what happened. There was a bunch of people celebrating the ceasefire, and Israel killed them. Well, listen, have you ever said, I'm starting a diet on Monday? What do you do Sunday? It's lasagna night. So this Israel's starting a diet of no killing of the Palestinians on Sunday. They're starting a strict ketogenic, no carbs, killing Palestinian babies at all for any reason on Sunday. But up until Sunday, you're going to loosen the belt loop a couple, no? I mean, it's like Sunday we're going to do the right thing, but tonight we dine in hell. I mean, that's kind of Israel ramps up deadly airstrikes on Gaza after a ceasefire deal is reached. They need a few days to get it out of their system, from what I understand. They need a few days. You can't go cold turkey on killing. You have to ease off. You got to ease off. You know, when I was in 5th grade, I was coming down a hill in Goshen, New York. It's a suburb in Rockland County. It might be Putnam. Either Putnam or Orange or Rockland County. It doesn't matter. The point is, I was coming down a hill. I pumped the brakes. I flew off the bike, and I got scars on the elbows. Rocks and everything went on the elbow because I pumped the brake, and I flew off. I jammed on the brakes. I didn't pump them. You got to pump the brake. You got to slow down at a speed that doesn't just jolt you. And I didn't. So Israel's going to have to, you got to give them a minute. They've really been killing now for the span of, 2 years? And now Hamas, remember Hamas? Hamas is going to let the hostages out. But before that happens, right here it says, Israel Hamas ceasefire deal will go into effect too late for Akram Abu Ahmed to see his children again. His family's sole survivor after an Israeli airstrike, Ahmed, was sleeping in the area of Gaza City in the early hours of Thursday, celebrating the news of the truce when he heard a loud sound and he was thrown into the air. Dust and screams around me. For Israel to attack, like it's a party to celebrate the truce. And Israel, I mean, it's out of line, but also, like, there's a level of irony there that cannot even fully be. I'm very happy about the ceasefire deal, but I'm going to say this. I don't believe, I'm putting myself out there, I don't believe this is the end of the problems between these two. I just don't. Call me a cynic. I believe that there's going to be some residual bad blood. I'll say it. I'll say it. And now Gaza's going to release the hostages. And I'm going to tell you this, and now people are going to get mad at me for saying this. I want grateful hostages when they come out. I want happy hostages, and I want hostages ready to turn the page. I do. Even if you were in the hole for a year or 2 years, and I know it's not good, and you have psychological issues and things like that. I know things were terrible. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not personally in the mood to do hostage trauma porn on every news show. Call me insensitive. I don't care. I want a happy hostage. Sorry. I want a hostage who's ready to turn the page. I don't want a hostage who's going to marinate in their misfortune in front of all of us. I'm sorry it happened. I didn't do it. But I want a happy hostage. During the 42-day first phase, 33 of the remaining women, children, elderly, and severely ill hostages will be released in exchange for roughly 1,000 Palestinian security prisoners. Israel will partially withdraw from Gaza while helping facilitate the entry of 600 trucks of humanitarian aid into the Strip each day. The second stage will see the release of the remaining living hostages and conclude with a declaration of a permanent ceasefire. The third phase will see the release of bodies still held by Hamas. And the fourth phase will be Israel nuking Gaza. That's phase 4. But when the hostages come out, and I know this has been a terrible ordeal for them, and I'm not minimizing that. I'm speaking only about the optics and the. We need to move on from this. And I know the hostages are going to come out and they're going to go on shows and they're going to talk about how terrible this has been. And I understand that, but I'm just asking, please, for the sake of moving on, is there any way that we can just, kind of feature the hostages where they are more positive about their experiences, slightly happier? To move on, there's got to be a few hostages that say, I wasn't doing a ton anyway. There's got to be a few hostages that go, listen, this was an interesting experience. I didn't love every part of it. This is what I want the hostages to say. This is what I want them to say. I want them to go, I didn't love every part of this, obviously. It was something, it came out of nowhere. But it's fascinating, this whole thing. Geopolitics. I think it's very interesting. I want a hostage to say something like that. I don't want them to go, and there was rape, and there was... I've had enough of the problems over there seeping into my issues when I'm trying to have a lunch. I want the one hostage to go, I'm telling you right now, I was sitting in a room, and they were killing someone next to me, and it was tough, but this whole thing, this labyrinth of tunnels, they would kind of take us from here to there. And a lot of people were scared because they didn't know if they were going to die. But I personally found it kind of interesting, the layout of it. Just the layout of it in general is kind of interesting to me. And then I started thinking really about this whole thing we're in, this whole crazy world. One day I'm above ground, next day I'm in a tunnel, now I'm out. And I've learned not to take things so seriously. I hope there's a hostage that comes out who says, I've learned through this whole ordeal to not take things so seriously. I used to get really angry when my wife would burn the breakfast. Now I don't care anymore. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just...
Imagine you're held by Hamas underground for 14 months and you're repeatedly raped and then you're finally released. But when you're released, you find out that your home burned down, right? Where would you rank your home burning down compared to being held by Hamas for 14 months?
Hoping we find that hostage. We got to find that hostage who's kind of easy come, easy go with it. Where you go, now tell us about your ordeal. And they go, listen, I got to be honest with you. There's a lot of people that were obviously very upset. And I understand that. And myself, there were times when it wasn't the best. But overall, I think it was a culturally enriching experience. And I...
Okay, Greg Gutfeld had some good moments Friday night.
Jokes we didn't use this week, and as always, it's my first time reading them, so if they suck, we'll force Joe Mackey to clean Joe Biden's toilet bowl with his toothbrush. His toothbrush. So this week, the presidential portraits were revealed for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Vance, as you can see, is sporting the beard. You know, that's the first beard to be in the White House since Michelle.
Oh, yeah. That's sorry.
Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen has admitted that she smoked weed. You know who else admitted to smoking weed? Her barber. She's still adorable. Japan is selling the world's first toilet paper made from used diapers. Damn, I wish I thought of that, said one woman. A new study reveals which countries have the largest breast sizes, as well as which country has the biggest asses. But in last place with an average of A cups was Greenland. However, that Arctic country still leads the world in hardest nipples. Trump has proposed creating an external revenue service to collect money owed to us by foreign countries. And if they don't pay, we send Chris Christie to sit on them. That's how you break some legs. California's Kyle Gordy, the world's most prolific sperm donor, is on track to father 100 children by the end of the year. Needless to say, Kyle is easily identifiable. Don Lemon went on a profanity-laced rant about Morning Joe host being too civil to Trump, prompting Don's passenger to give him a lousy Uber rating. Some people are self-deporting ahead of Trump's return to the White House. It's true. Seriously, Liz Warren is already going back to the Navajo Nation on horseback. In an interview with the Washington Post, Dr. Jill Biden laments Nancy Pelosi's betrayal, saying they were friends for 50 years. Yeah, she thinks Nancy is two-faced, which is an insult to her other 6 faces. An Alaska Airlines flight attendant was fired for twerking on camera. In her defense, she's claiming that the pilot had just illuminated the "Shake Dat Ass" sign. An OnlyFans sex worker claims she screwed over 1,000 men in 12 hours. Yeah, she's thinking of changing her name to DEI. That's good, huh? You thought it was going to go one way, right? Oh, this is filthy. No. It became politically relevant before your eyes. And for their heroic efforts during the wildfires, a porn star is offering free services to LA firefighters. Patriotic men over there. They're already saluting. In a related story, guess who was just caught impersonating an LA firefighter? All right. Those were fun. So this week, President-elect Trump announced that on his first day in office, he plans to create a new government agency called the External Revenue Service. It's a pretty clever name, if you ask me. I can imagine how it came about. There's this meeting, and some guy says, you know, what about the Internal Revenue Service? They suck. And then some other guy goes, yeah, you're right, they do suck. I mean, why can't we have an External Revenue Service? Then Trump's eyes light up. And he says, I love it. We'll announce it tomorrow. But what is it? Asks one guy. And Trump says, who the cares? You're fired. Because he's right. He knows it's perfect. The mission is right in the title. Here's what Trump said, quote, for far too long, we have relied on taxing our great people using the IRS. Through soft and pathetically weak trade agreements, the American economy has delivered growth and prosperity to the world while taxing ourselves. We will begin charging those that make money off of us with trade, and they will start paying, finally, their fair share. Huh? In other words, just like Americans fear the consequences of not paying their taxes at home, foreign countries we do business with will now feel that same fear. Our companies have sent jobs overseas only to import products here at no cost. We've been getting screwed on both ends like a double-headed bolt. Joey knows what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. Even more, all these countries have a huge GDP. You know, it's as if they're billionaires who won't pay their fair share. In essence, Trump is creating leverage in all negotiations where leverage never existed before. Think of it this way. A lot of countries don't put anything into their own military because they know they can count on ours. They're like the weak twerps who hang out with a high school bully, acting cocky but never having to throw a punch. Shalou gets that. Other countries think of us like a free insurance policy against invasion. So now Trump wants to turn our military into a private security force, an insurance plan with guns and a copay. Kind of makes sense for countries with no military. Or think of NATO. They have generous social programs because they don't have to spend as much on the military thanks to us. So it's about putting America first, and it began with Greenland. You know, look, we're happy to represent you guys, but we get something in return. So by creating the ERS, Trump puts his thought, this thought, which never occurred to you, into your mind, whether you like it or not. And what if it makes sense? First, Trump has to reveal the consequences if countries lose American protection. Till now, we've been offering protection through our military and access to our market, where they replaced one Darren with another Darren. It's like they replaced Mr. Roper with Godzilla. These are...
I don't know who any of those people are.
I know. I purposely use references
Can
you wouldn't
you do
understand.
it again with people from Vanderpump Rules?
No. You know, I look at you. You were like a teen mom.
I'm 36.
No, that's a compliment.
Actually, a geriatric pregnancy.
That's a compliment.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's a compliment, Erica.
No, I'm saying she looks too young to be pregnant.
Oh.
Yeah. You ain't from Georgia.
Thank you.
You tell me I don't compliment you enough, and then I compliment you in front of 20 million people.
20 million. Well, listen, I can also admit I'm in a tough spot right now because I don't understand the External Revenue Service. I don't understand at all how it works because the tariffs are paid by the importer, not the foreign government. But I also know that I work on cable news. So your job is not to understand. Your job is to have a strong opinion regardless.
Okay, that's funny. That is an excellent line there. All right, what else we got lined up here?
Chocolate bar for everybody. No school, right? Like all the cliched Bart Simpson type of isms. And that's what Trump is doing over like the next 4 or 5 days. So I'm excited to see what's next. And Carolla should have been on that list.
Yeah.
Adam Carolla should have been on that list.
Well, I was troubled by the list, Kat, because there was no non-binary woman of color.
Was there ever a list? I feel like he just, I feel like he probably just like thought of it and posted it.
Yeah.
Because Mel Gibson said that's how he found out.
Right. He's talking about Donald Trump said that Mel Gibson, Sylvester Stallone, and John Boyd are his ambassadors to Hollywood.
Yeah, on social, yeah.
Is that when it was posted? And he was like, okay. I think a lot of the problems with Hollywood, I think, have a lot to do with the problems of California. It's just cheaper to do things other places and it's easier to do things other places than it is in California. And also movies in general. Are movies going to be around in 20 years?
No.
They're too long.
Yeah.
If I was scrolling through Instagram reels and I was like, 2 minutes, I'm not watching that.
Yeah.
Like, you want 2 minutes of my next?
Yeah.
So a movie?
How many times do you stop a movie now when you're watching it at home?
Okay, so the last movie I think I haven't watched a movie in like 7 months, honestly.
Yeah.
And it has to be, it's like you watch and you rewind and you watch and you rewind, you watch. The commitment that you're asking of me there is more than I'm comfortable with at this point in my life. Maybe when I'm a little older.
Yeah. No, it's
when you're old enough to have a baby.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Some good lines there from Kat. Democrats are losing the war for attention badly. Here's Ezra Klein talking to Chris Hayes of MSNBC.
Than whatever comes after it. And one way, reliably, to get people's attention is negative attention. Like, if you insult people, act outrageously, I mean, this is literally, there was a commercial model for this, which is shock jocks of the 1980s and 90s that we grew up with, right? Like, they were in a competitive attentional marketplace in local places. Shock jocks said outrageous things. They weren't trying to get someone to vote for them. They just wanted you to know that they were on the running the morning zoo. You know?
I don't know how to insert into the discourse a strong enough point that Joe Rogan is much better than Howard Stern was.
Yes, it's true.
Like, nobody quite wants to admit this because now Howard Stern has become this lovable uncle who, you know, for liberals, who has Hillary Clinton on his show, and I think Kamala Harris went on his show. But I think Rogan is the inheritor of Stern, basically. And, you know, Rogan has become much more right-wing in the past couple of years. But compared to what Stern was, Rogan is just smarter and preferable.
I think that's probably true. But what I find crazy is the shock jock model has now become a successful model in politics.
Okay, but now I think we need to have like a moment of caution, because there's a tendency right now, because Donald Trump won the popular vote by like 1.5 percentage points, which is a terrible win in like the annals of American politics, right? And yet there's just like no doubt that Trump and his broad cultural side have won some kind of cultural and attentional victory that is much bigger in its feeling than the actual electoral victory they won. So some of these things both feel true. Like, I'm not sure this works as well in politics, but in terms of changing the culture, like, his win has changed the culture immediately in a way that I would not have foreseen and does not reflect. Like, if you just told somebody the election results, I don't think they would feel the vibe shift.
So I agree with that, and I want to sort of take those in two parts, because I think the politics is actually worth taking a second with. Mark Robinson ran for governor of North Carolina. He was already elected as statewide as a lieutenant governor, said lots of outrageous things all the time. He was discovered to be almost certainly, I think he denies it, but it seems to me pretty plausible, a commenter on the Nude Africa site where he said all sorts of wildly offensive things, including, "I am a black Nazi." Robinson lost that race in North Carolina, a state Trump carried. It's probably like a +1 or 2 Republican state at national level. It didn't work for him. Like, there was a lot of attention market. Kari Lake courted negative attention, lost 2 successive statewide races. Doug Mastriano. I could go down the list. So there's something really fascinating.
J.D. Vance underperformed in Ohio in his Senate considerably.
So there is something happening where it's not a great, it has not proven to be a replicable strategy. That the old logic that we were just talking about the Democrats having and being outdated still does hold in a lot of races. That said, in terms of influence, I think negative attention is incredibly effective. And I think you're seeing this shock jock. You can call it shock jock. You can just call it trolling politics. I mean, it is trolling politics. The idea of trolling and the reason that trolling exists is...
Well, I would think it would be really effective if you're up against an artificial, stilted, carefully constructed discourse, which is what dominates our elites and our educated class right now. The conversation on the mainstream news and in the acceptable elite forums is just so stilted, so that you can't say that something's retarded. You can't say that Joe Biden is showing signs of senility. There are all sorts of basic bitch words that you can't use in elite discourse. And so when elite discourse has become so contrived, it has become so elevated, it has become so abstract, it has become so removed from reality, then someone who comes along like Donald Trump and gives us some real speech, that will be intoxicating by comparison to the stilted discourse that dominated the news, dominated the way that our elites speak. So the center and the center left and the left among our elites could not admit that Joe Biden had cognitive problems until Biden's disastrous performance June 27th of last year in his debate with Donald Trump. But for people who are not part of that crowd, they saw back to 2017 that Joe Biden was showing considerable signs of senility, but you can't even say a word like senility or retarded in elite discourse. So when elite discourse, when the dominant high ground of culture and news becomes so abstracted, removed from reality, right, becomes so careful that people fear telling basic bitch truths, then someone who comes along and tells basic bitch truths, right, they have the ability to push through if they're also a compelling character. And I think that's what's happening with Donald Trump. All right, let's get some perspectives here from the
Seeing your
five.
observations from today.
This was a man who's met his destiny. He said he was saved by God in order to make America great again and usher in a new golden age. And the concentration of power that you saw in that room, probably the greatest concentration of power since the Constitutional Convention, made viewers and the country believe it was possible because they were all getting along.
All right, good question from the chat. How many years can NATO be a foreign policy foil until it formally breaks down? Well, things don't have to end in a black and white manner. All right, I can phase someone out of my life by simply spending less time with them, less intensity with them, move the relationship from in real life to just virtual phone or FaceTime, and reduce the length, the duration, and how often we communicate. So the United States can start phasing out of NATO, right? And that may well happen long before there is a formal renunciation of NATO. So the less cognitive time that Donald Trump spends thinking about NATO or thinking about Israel, that will represent a shift away from previous close alliances.
And you saw the potential in this country when people do get along. At one point, he said a tide of change is sweeping America and sunlight is pouring over the entire world. And he said something necessary, and a lot of people maybe didn't like it on the other side, but he said the Democrats and Joe Biden have betrayed this country. And that was the cold, hard truth, and it needed to be said to his face, because we don't...
Right, there are a lot of women who dated me and went to bed with me when they were depressed. And when they regained some sense of self-respect, like they gave me the flick. So there was the occasional Saturday night or lonely Tuesday night that they want me to come over, or they weren't that into me, but then their apartment got robbed and it made them feel incredibly vulnerable, and they wanted me to come over and stay with them and make them feel safe. So people can be just not that into you or just not that into NATO, and they can start to disengage, and a circumstance may come up where it's useful, but it's hard to believe that NATO is just going to keep rolling. Why does the United States want to safeguard the safety of all these different nations when that increasingly, as each month goes by, it has less and less to do with vital American strategic interests? We can put our resources and our time and our focus, and instead we can emphasize what is in the best interest of the United States of America. We no longer need NATO, right? NATO has been a pain. It has been a millstone around our neck. I remember I met this beautiful woman. I met this intelligent woman. She had a minor in Latin. I met this very amenable woman, right? She was happy just to fit into my life. And she was exotic and erotic and exciting and cute, and she could do all sorts of cheerleader moves, and she just absolutely intoxicated me, and she was happy to just go with me everywhere I went, and she was happy to just fold into me, right? We would cuddle when I wanted to cuddle, and when I wanted to work, she'd sit off to the side and be on her laptop. She was wonderful, but she was dysfunctional, right? When I met her, she was essentially homeless. She was living on the couch of her sister and living in her office at the Los Angeles Press Club, and as the full nature of her dysfunction and of her past habits of getting into completely unnecessary feuds became more and more clear to me, right? Her erotic power and romantic power and her amiable traits and her good looks became less and less important. I felt more and more that she was a millstone around my neck. And I even told her, you feel like a millstone around my neck. And NATO increasingly must feel for the United States like a millstone around its neck.
Don't fear that anymore. It was probably the most ambitious speech ever given by a human being. We're going to plant the stars and stripes on Mars. We're going to make America healthy again. We're going to seal the border. We're going to beat inflation. We're going to save our cities. And a lot of people watching felt that it was possible today. A lot of the times you hear politicians run their mouths and you're like, all right, this is just another political speech. This wasn't a political speech. This was a speech made by a hero. We're going to save our cities. He says the ambition is the lifeblood of a great nation. Possible. Talks about the spirit of the frontier, the call to adventure, and tied it back to the history of this great country. We came and we conquered and tamed the wilderness, tamed fascism, communism, and split the atom. So at one point he said, I stand before you as proof that nothing is impossible, that the impossible is what we do best. This was the hope and change speech that Obama never really delivered on. When they said, Barack and Joe, they wanted to fundamentally change America, this agenda is about fundamentally changing America because we're in transformational times. The media is changing. We're changing how we feel about our health. We're changing our economy. We're changing technology. The map is changing. Literally, he said, we want to take back Panama. And it was the most inspiring speech he's ever given that I've personally ever heard. And it's an exciting time to be alive.
Greg, the one thing, though, that really didn't change is that throughout the campaign, ever since he announced his run, he said, these are the issues I'm going to work on. And then today he's like, and I'm going to deliver on those very same issues.
Yeah, no, he never wavered. During the speech, as I was listening, all I was doing was looking at Joe. You know, watching him as 4 years, the last 4 years was handed to him like a sizzling Trump steak. This wasn't an in-your-face Harold. It was an in-your-face and up-your-ass Joe. It was humiliating. But I think this event is different because it's not just about Trump. It's about everyone involved who had a personal journey that paralleled Trump. Because if you supported him, you were thrown into battle. So this was like a convergence of stories into one victorious moment. Everybody involved in this felt it. It felt bigger than a typical inauguration. And Trump took it away from the left versus right dichotomy by using two words that everyone needed to hear: common sense, right? It's something that we lost under Biden when you looked at the border and the crime and the trans hysteria. It was an attack on common sense, and we needed the middle ground. We needed to go from wanting to deciding, and Trump was there. And his speech was very clear. I saw how the New York Times portrayed it as grim, and it was because he was doing so much that was literally in your face. But that's what happens when you push a country too far. Not only did you push Americans too far under the Biden administration, if they pushed back.
So I prefer grim if it's real and it's true and it's important. To me, that's an enormous relief. It makes me happy if someone gives me the grim news, if it's real and true and important. It makes me unhappy when somebody gives me happy talk and palaver and nonsense and political correctness when there are grim realities that need to be confronted and dealt with. And so I feel good when Trump gives us grim news that is important, true, real, that we should focus on, that we need to overcome, right? Grim news, if it's true, real, important, makes me happy.
You would be punished by cancellation. And that's another thing that Trump did. He took the fear of cancellation off the table. You could share the risk. Everybody shared the risk. Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi, all these people came in because they realized if you shared the risk, they can't come after everybody. So daddy's home. And they may be pissed, but America couldn't be happier.
Judge, one of the things that was pretty interesting, too, was that he gave a speech after the speech. So, yeah. And I think it seems to me that he's having a great time.
I think he's not only having a great time, I think he...
Okay, let's get a little bit from Mark Halperin. He gave this interview January 17. I believe that's Friday.
About parenting, and we hope that the people who want to advertise to parents will advertise there, not through the kind of ads.
So he's talking about his business model for two-way.
Programmatic ads that run automatically on YouTube. And by the way, we're making money now through that kind of ad because our audience on YouTube is sizable. But sponsorships pay to a particular content. And then primarily our revenue model is payments from what I call superfans. I have another business that I do separate from Two-Way called Concierge Coverage, where I bring people together also through live video, but primarily it's for a newsletter. And I charge a lot for that newsletter. I charge two tiers. One is $3,600 a year and one's $4,800 a year. I think it's the most expensive political content in the United States, at least. And the people who pay me that are what I call super fans, consumers of news who don't think there's a replacement for my political content. They could read free political content on all sorts of websites and social media that costs nothing, but they want my content, and so they'll pay a lot for it. And so we'll have programming coming up soon. I'll be on some of it. Others will be at my colleagues that will charge people a high price to be, or not always a high price, sometimes a high price, but maybe $5, maybe a subscription, $25 a year, whatever it is, but some substantially more expensive, because we'll find people who can produce live programming that's not really available anywhere else.
Well, that's a super interesting story that you talked about on Two-Way was the declining health of President Biden, which was something that really people knew or must have known, but somehow nobody really picked up on it until he had this train crash on live stage in the debate. And then suddenly everybody said, well, this is totally impossible. But it didn't come out of nowhere. But somehow nobody really picked up on that story. How could that happen?
Martin, it's a huge mystery to me. From a mechanical point of view, it happened in part because the people around Joe Biden and the White House press corps conspired to engage in a cover-up, to not discuss it. And when it was discussed, to be critical of, both publicly and privately, those who raised the issue. Because I don't work for establishment media, I was free to raise it, and I did it on a regular basis. I've known Joe Biden my whole career, and I saw his mental decline in 2017, before he ran for president the first time. So I was a little dumbfounded when I saw him run for president. And then he decided he was going to do it again, even though it didn't require secret sources to see his decline. You just had to have a TV or YouTube account to see what was playing. The most obvious metaphor is the emperor's new clothes, the fable, because Joe Biden was walking around without any clothes on, and everybody was saying, look at a beautiful suit. I don't know why. I don't know why entirely, but I think the primary reason was because of the dreaded American disease, which also strains of which exist in Europe, Trump derangement syndrome. I think people around Joe Biden and people in the media did not want to participate in any activities that would maybe increase the chances Donald Trump would return to the White House. The irony, of course, is by covering it up for so long, it allowed Joe Biden to continue to say he was going to run again for another term, and it left the Democrats scrambling to replace him with just several weeks to go before the election. And you could argue that had he gotten out earlier, had he been called on the reality of his decline earlier, he would have been forced to step aside, allowing the party to mount a more traditional campaign over months and not weeks. That's my explanation, but it's really not a sufficient one, because I don't believe there's a scandal like that in American history where something so important, not just about whether he could run and win again, but being the commander-in-chief and president of the United States in his condition, to cover something that up, try to cover something like that up over many months when the truth was so apparent. I just don't believe there's ever been anything like that.
It's quite a story. I'm sure that there will be books will be written about that at some point. But it's quite a story. And like you said right now, I mean, Trump surely is not a boss on the bus, right? You were his vice president. So when the media asked her, well, you always say you're different from Joe Biden. So how are you different? And then there wasn't much coming from her. And I can, to a certain point, understand it. But then that is, of course, a problem. And then I remember one clip when they asked her about abortion. And they said, well, of course, we understand you support the right to abortion. But tell me, up to which month? 6 months? 7 months? 8 months? Where are the limits for you? And she wouldn't draw a line, not anywhere. And even as a European, I was like, whoa, I mean, you have to draw a line somewhere, right? So was it her cautiousness? Was it her fear to say something wrong? What was it in your view?
Yeah. So, Martin, the examples you gave are great ones. And there are lots of ways, I think, to describe the reason she fell short. I think the best one, in my experience, having covered her for a long time, I think it's the most succinct and accurate, is she does not like to make difficult decisions under pressure. And the problem with that liability, that Achilles heel, is that's the job description of both presidential candidate and president. She has an aversion to making difficult decisions under pressure, particularly if they're decisions that could anger someone. So saying, I think abortion should be legal till the 8th month is going to anger people on the left and on the right. Saying there should be no limits is not going to anger people on the right. Saying the limit should be after 2 weeks is going to anger people on the left. She just does not like to do that. And that caution, that aversion is not compatible with the navigation of a presidential campaign.
Yeah, that's interesting, because if you can't make those choices, even when you're on the spot, well, then you have a problem. Also makes it easy for them, right? Because of course, sometimes his claims are outlandish and outrageous.
Obnoxious. Otherwise, Europeans, I don't get that sense. Look, Donald Trump is a very flawed person as a human, as a politician, as a president. He's very flawed, but he's also a man of enormous ability. He's not dumb, for instance. I've known him a long time, and I really try to convince people who think he's dumb that you're not only going to be intellectually inaccurate, but you're going to underestimate him. If you are Donald Trump's rival, if you're a Democrat or a journalist or somebody who has an agenda that's in conflict with Trump's, you will be doing yourself a disservice if you treat him like he's a dumb person, because he's not. He's very smart. He does 100 things a day that make Europeans nuts. And I get that, and they make a lot of Americans nuts too. But Joe Biden does a lot of things that people don't like either. And I can't tell you that Joe Biden necessarily was good for Europe. It was not on Donald Trump's watch that Vladimir Putin went into Ukraine. It was on Joe Biden's watch. Now, Joe Biden's defenders can explain lots of reasons why that was, but it's just a historical reality, a factual matter. And I don't think Europe has been well served, to say the least, by Vladimir Putin's feeling he could walk into eastern and other parts of Ukraine. So my point is, Donald Trump's not perfect for the United States. He's not perfect for Europe. But I urge people to judge him by his performance, not by his rhetoric. Judge him not by only his worst actions, but by the ones that are successful. And I think in a range of areas that matter to Europeans, Donald Trump has arguably been a better president for Europe than Joe Biden. Not in every way. And I have no shortage of European friends who are very patient and explain to me why they have Trump arrangements in Germany.
Okay, let's get a little burst here from Fox News, Jesse Waters, Greg Gutfeld. Let's see what they have to say.
Mentioned just now, they have some of the hostage families there in yellow. They have all the symbolism of a State of the Union, where they use individuals to make a point, and maybe people around the table don't like the British pomp and circumstance looking this way, but I love the lineage that we can tie back to the British with the royal red and the beautiful orchestra we heard throughout the day. Melania looks incredible. Yep. I think I speak for all Americans, probably one of the most unifying things I've ever said. The hat, I can't get over the hat. I don't know what it means. I just can't stop looking at it. What does the hat mean?
It is a tribute to the late, great actor Lee Van Cleef.
Well, I'm going to believe that, because the hat is on fire. Barron, it must be said, the camera loves Barron. There's a mystery to Barron because you don't see him a lot and he doesn't express himself a lot. But there's something about him that makes me think he has a lot in common with his father. And he might step into a leadership role if he wants to, maybe not. The JD factor, the youth.
Yeah.
It looks like he needed a little help wrangling the kids at one point. But I just love the fact that the kids are there, and it breathes new life into the American political system when you have a young vice president like that with his family.
Well, children bring joy no matter where they go or where they are. And so that is also going to be a fun.
I wonder if she has any children, because children bring a lot of things. Sometimes joy, sometimes more challenges.
I get it, but I think they're being short-sighted, and the reality for Europeans is, barring some change, Donald Trump's going to be president for 4 years. And so I recommend to Europeans the same thing I recommend to my American friends who do not get it. I would spend at least as much time trying to understand Donald Trump's appeal as you do denigrating him.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's good advice. I don't know if I really want to see the outcome of this negotiation.
United States, I'm pro-world, but I often find myself cast as explaining Trump because I think he is misunderstood. How have Europeans, as I suggested before, how have Europeans enjoyed Joe Biden's ability to end the war? It's not been very good, right? Vladimir Zelensky. Zelensky, thank you. Zelensky, my joke about this is he's be willing to consider negotiating an end to the war except under two conditions. When the war is going well for Ukraine, because he's not going to stop if they're advancing. He doesn't want to negotiate at a time when they're taking ground and gaining strength in a negotiation. And then the only other circumstance he won't negotiate is when the war is going poorly, because he doesn't want to make a settlement on his back foot. And obviously the joke is those are the only two circumstances that ever exist. The only way to get a settlement here, and there has to be a settlement, right? But it doesn't appear either side's going to win this war on the battlefield. is to force the parties to negotiate. And I just say again, you look at Joe Biden in Gaza, you look at Joe Biden in Ukraine, look at Joe Biden in other hotspots around the world. He's not proven to be particularly effective at leveraging an end to conflicts or leveraging Xi in China. So I think that most people I know who are knowledgeable about the region have known what the settlement was going to be for a while, right? They get to keep Putin gets to keep Crimea. He gets to keep those portions of the East that have a Russian cultural heritage and language and affinity, and then some sort of clever status for Ukraine. Certainly, Putin's not going to tolerate them becoming full-fledged NATO members, but some sort of path towards protection and integration into the West. That deal is there for the taking, but it's not one that Joe Biden apparently could get, because not only did he fail to intimidate Putin to keep him from invading, but he failed to get the parties to the table. So I hear from Europeans all the time, and from some Americans, boy, Trump's in bed with Putin. He's going to go in a room and give away the store. I think he's going to give away as little as has to be given away in order to get this thing settled so people can stop dying and the Ukraine can be rebuilt.
All right. The idea that Trump is just in bed with Putin and is just going to give away the store to Putin, I've never seen any evidence for that. None. It's just something that's completely made up. Where has Donald Trump given away the store to Vladimir Putin? Recognizing that Vladimir Putin, until Donald Trump, has been the most effective leader of a major power in the past 30 years, that Vladimir Putin has done more with his rather limited hand than anyone could have suspected, that Vladimir Putin has restored Russia to considerable power on the world stage. That's not giving away the store. That's not being in bed with Putin. It's recognizing a formidable adversary. So was the North better off during the Civil War just denigrating the great generals and the great officers and the great fighting forces in the South? No. Most of America's great fighting people have come from the South, right? That they're Southerners. And recognizing that different groups have different gifts, recognizing the abilities of Russia to ruin our day, right? To recognize the formidable nature of the Russian nuclear arsenal, to recognize how much Vladimir Putin has been able to do with Russia. When he took over, it was a bankrupt country that was just falling apart, and Putin has steadily restored Russia to increasing levels of glory, right? Just recognizing those realities on the ground is nothing to do with getting into bed with Putin. There's zero evidence that Donald Trump is giving away the store to Putin. All right, withdrawing from unnecessary conflicts in the world is not giving away the store to Putin. That's being America first. It's one of the stupidest lies that is frequently said about Donald Trump. And there are so many valid criticisms of Donald Trump, right? There are so many accurate, empirical, logical reasons. There are many bases that are sound on which to criticize Donald Trump. But to make that he's just in love with Putin, in bed with Putin, giving away the store to Putin, has zero basis in reality. It's pathetic, right? Why not use the strong arguments at your disposal instead of such a pathetic argument?
And people who don't like Trump will say he gave too much to Putin. Well, Zelensky's going to have to agree, number one. And number two, Biden couldn't find a formula to end the war. And I think Trump will. And I think that's to his credit, even though there'll always be second guessing about whether he gave too much to Putin.
Yeah. But I think one problem that with
peace talks begin, right? And although
but at the end of the day, the successful Western-oriented Ukraine is a no-no for Vladimir Putin.
I agree with you 100%. But you know, we all know that it's facts on the ground that dictate what happens when peace talks begin, right? And although there's different ways to think about it, both in its totality and over time, Putin has not been as successful, in part because of Biden's organization of a coalition of the willing to support Ukraine and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. But this war has not gone the way Putin wanted it to. And so there's obviously been, from day one,
It's stupid to just take various politicians primarily on a personal basis, right? There are situations where Hillary Clinton will be excellent. There are situations where Bill Clinton is excellent. Bill Clinton is probably the greatest natural politician in the United States of the past 30 years. Now, I'm a Republican, so there were many things about Bill Clinton that I did not like. But just to have Trump derangement syndrome or Nancy Pelosi derangement syndrome or Barack Obama derangement syndrome doesn't serve you, right? Barack Obama comes with a certain skill set. That different people are good at different things. Like there are areas in life where I suck, and there are areas in life where I excel. Well, why not apply that same prism to public figures? Elon Musk, so much of him has the grifter and the charlatan component, and then he also does important work. So Elon Musk does good things, he does bad things, he says stupid things, he says smart things. Why not just recognize him as a flawed human being who has some substantial accomplishments and is a highly unreliable narrator of many things, that absolutely reckless in many things, reckless often in the way that he tweets. But you can't just dismiss his considerable accomplishment as being the world's richest man. At the same time, you don't want to bow down to it. You recognize that there's much that is questionable and delusional and just clearly wrong about Elon Musk, and that he has many of the traits of the charlatan and the con man, while also possessing a substantial body of achievement. Donald Trump, so much of the scam artist and the con man about him. He started a meme coin just before taking office as president of the United States. It's reprehensible. It's disgusting that what he did, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 2020 election, was a horrible thing. Whatever role he played in inspiring the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill was a terrible thing. And at the same time, Donald Trump has done good things in reducing immigration, in reorienting our foreign policy to focus on our greatest geostrategic rival, China. So people are mixed, right? People have good points, they have bad points. In some situations, they're going to excel. One politician that you just may instinctively loathe, but there may be half the population for whom he speaks their language. So the situationist approach, recognizing that certain people are going to shine in certain situations and are going to be idiots in other situations, is such a more sophisticated and useful approach than just hating or just admiring people. Right? There are some things that Greg Gutfeld does that are worthy of admiration. There are other things that he does that are stupid, and other things he does that are worthy of derision. Same with all the rest of us. Right? No one is all good, all bad.
Careful watch on the Russian economy, the Russian willingness to send its young men to die, the Russian capacity to arm folks and to replace munitions. And Russia, I think it's fair to say, has done a surprisingly strong job in keeping the war effort going. At the same time, they've suffered extraordinary losses, and it's not sustainable forever. And so, you know, you're right that Putin, if Putin makes a deal, it's going to certainly involve the prospect of Ukraine being integrated economically and somewhat military into the West. And that's why, I agree with you, that's why he went to war. But the weakness that his side has shown in the battlefield means he's going to have to negotiate a settlement that allows him to save some face, having control over some of the East and of Crimea. That's not horrible. That's not nothing for him. And given the weakness they've shown on the battlefield, that's probably the best he can hope for.
Well, we'll be there to watch, right? And you talked this morning on your show about Mike Waltz.
Look to see what are the asymmetrical strengths of both sides, where they have an edge, and how do things change over time. And I think what we've seen, what are the sort of recent things that are seminal changes. One is there's far less talk about China invading Taiwan than there was, although it's still a concern. China's economy is it's not the weakest it's been in the last 30 years, but it's close to it. There are a lot of question marks about the Chinese economy in terms of some of their financial institutions, in terms of real estate, in terms of exports long term, in terms of competition with the United States. You know, not much talk about how long Xi will be in power, but he's getting up there in age, and it's not clear who the next leader will be and what kind of posture they'll have. On the other hand, China is stronger than it's been militarily. And in terms of the Belt and Road program, they're kind of mercantile.
So people don't talk about China as just being inevitable and unstoppable anymore. There's an OnlyFans creator in Turkey who was planning to have sex with 100 men, and she ended up getting arrested. So Turkey's not down with the whole gangbang culture. So you have to draw the line somewhere. If you're going to preserve the civilization, you have to have borders, boundaries. Their boundaries are either natural or they're artificial. At some point, you have to stop the urge to porn. At some point, you have to stop the ability of foreigners who don't have anything to contribute to enter your country. Civilization requires boundaries, right? Physical boundaries, artificial boundaries, and also spiritual boundaries, or some checks on the human impulse to destroy itself, to dissipate itself, to just expel its vital bodily essence all over the dusty soil. So there should be something that makes access to pornography only available to people who sign up and prove that they are adults. There is no way that children should have access to pornography on the internet without going to extraordinary measures. There's no way that someone who doesn't want to be confronted by pornography is just going to run into it on the internet. We have failed to control corporations, including big tech, to make sure that they're operating in our best interest, because corporations, they spend 10 times as much in lobbying as public interest groups and unions do. So on both the Republican side and the Democratic side, our politicians are in hock to corporations, and it's outrageous that children will just stumble on porn online. It's outrageous that someone who doesn't want to be confronted by porn will just stumble on porn online. It's a major failing that we have not regulated big tech to protect kids. And big tech, they don't want to be hassled, and so they will say all sorts of bogus sentiments about how they care about kids and that they care about their platform operating in a pro-social way, and they will bend to the political winds. But if our politicians truly cared about family values and decency and preserving our civilization, all right, they would limit access to hardcore pornography to only those who specifically sign up for it and prove that they're adults. Otherwise, it should not be flowing across the screens of children. And this arrest in Turkey of some woman who is about to have sex with 100 men as a OnlyFans creator, there has to be a limit somewhere. So where exactly society builds the barrier, the boundary, limits the self-destruction, but it shouldn't be so effortless. I think in 36 states right now, you can just download an app and start gambling on sports, and it shouldn't be that easy, particularly dangerous for young men who make all sorts of unnecessarily risky choices. And I just like that image that civilization requires walls, and the walls are either there naturally, such as oceans, or they are put there artificially, such as the Great Wall of China. But without that, you build something great, other people will pour in and they'll take it. And then you can't have civilization. And human beings need walls. They need barriers. There need to be some things in society that discourage people from self-destructing and acting in an antisocial manner, and reward people for making good choices and responsible choices.
Expansionist alliances that they formed in Latin America and Africa, those are a threat to the United States, to be sure. And there's very little, as you know, areas of bipartisan consensus in the United States, but there is a bipartisan consensus that China is not a strategic rival or a...
And there should be a bipartisan consensus that children do not deserve to be exposed to pornography. It doesn't seem like a difficult one, or if people don't want it, they shouldn't have to face it.
These people go in one day a month, and then you think about, like, the border decisions, and you think about there are only two genders. It's kind of sad that we have to say this. It's like we're in the state of our culture that you actually have an executive order about biology because we've allowed the country to slide into this bizarre cultural Marxism, and that has allowed us to undermine just basic common sense. And now we actually have to say this stuff is kind of, it's freaky.
He's going to have an executive order that crime is illegal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I want to also play for you. This is a media montage of a lot of frustration from other places about the tech titans being there today. Watch.
We're about to enter an era of deep fakes and all sorts of misinformation, and the degree to which those 5 gentlemen play a role or do not play a role will be pivotal in terms of where the American people are 4 years from now.
They have better seats than people who are going to actually serve in Donald Trump's administration.
How is this happening?
Only in America.
How is this happening? Why are people with tons of money up on the dais?
That is so rich.
Oh, man.
Greg.
You know what I think? I think that was fake Tapper, not Jake Tapper. I think that was misinformation. You know, even if you believe the Tech brothers will somehow come together and create misinformation, they can't even approach the scope, the scale, the breadth of the Joe Biden cover-up. That wasn't done by the Tech brothers. That was done by you guys. You know, the Tech brothers didn't tell us Joe was fine. You know, they didn't go, you know, they didn't reject their noble vocation and refuse to do journalism. That was you guys. No one will ever be as bad as contemporary media I mean, they are DOA. No one takes that seriously.
Because of DEI, we could keep the alphabet going. One of the things, Harold, that we're in a big race with some of our biggest adversaries like China when it comes to technology in particular.
Okay, let's get a little bit more from Mark Halperin. He'll be live in 5 minutes.
Potential ally, they are the enemy. And that, whether it's military, diplomatic, economic, cultural, that China must be stopped. That China is too dangerous a threat to the United States, to the United States' allies in the region, to Europe. And so I think Donald Trump, for all of his treatment of Premier Xi, the way he treats Putin, my friend, you know, warmth, engagement, Donald Trump is part of the group in the United States that believes this is an epic struggle and must be won. And so Joe Biden kept almost every one of Trump's economic policies and military policies vis-a-vis China in place. And there are both political and substantive reasons for that. And I think despite the fact that he and Xi were longtime friends, they knew each other for many, many years, I do think you'll see a new, tougher China policy, particularly on economics. And I think the Chinese are going to have to decide how they want to react to that, if they want to sue for peace and see if they can't get mutual concessions, or whether they'll say, okay, game on, let's fight this out. I think that remains to be seen.
Well, another story that will be interesting to watch as it unfolds in the coming years. 2 more topics.
Things integral to thinking about the temptation, which is the development of the nuclear program. All recent American presidents have said, red line, Iran cannot be allowed to conclude, finish, and possess nuclear weapons that they could use to threaten or inflict harm against American allies in the region. So from a factual matter, at the highest levels of American intelligence, they have an understanding of where that program is. But if they determine that they're on the cusp of having the weapons, or if they have them, that's a different calculus. That's a calculus the United States, in theory, might have reached even if Iran weren't so weak. In other words, the necessity of a strike or some other action, regardless of whether Iran is weak. With Iran being weak, you know, I think the new administration will go back to a sanctions regime, an economic sanctions regime that the Biden folks took some off. I'm not sure why. I've never really understood that. But I think you're going to see sanctions for sure. And then if it appears, based on intelligence, that they're on the cusp of developing a nuclear weapon, I think you may see a strike without, as you suggested, the fear that's existed for so long about retaliation. Now, there's another deterrent to a strike besides fear of retaliation, which is if you hit a nuclear facility, you run the risk of sending hazardous material blowing all around the Middle East. The long-term game, maybe it's medium-term now, is a revolution. You know, it's not done in polite diplomatic company to talk about regime change, but that's what the United States government's goal is. The United States government would like to see the intellectual class, the military class, the people in the military who want rapprochement with the West. They'd like to see a new government, a secular government, a representative government, a government that was more about integration of Iran into the world economy than about religious theocracy. And during the Arab Spring, that seemed possible, but it didn't happen. And I think you'll see in the Trump administration, you'll see an effort to see if, without violating international law or international norms, it's possible to foster that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting to see how that one plays out. Trump means business. He wants to get shit done. So what will he do on his first day?
Well, he'll be sworn in. He'll give a speech. And I think the world and the United States will be looking to see what the tone of that speech is. I suspect, based on what I've been told, it'll be more about unity than his speech 8 years ago, when he famously used the phrase American carnage and seemed to be speaking to part of the United States rather than to everybody. So I think people will be looking at this speech to see what tone he sets. And then there'll be a record number of executive orders. Some have practically or entirely the force of law. Some of them are, as some people like to say, autographed press releases that the president signed.
So Halperin should be live in about a minute. Let's see what Greg Gutfeld's talking about.
And some other characters.
Nellie the singer?
Nellie the singer, yes. Harold. How do I know more about Nellie than you?
It's getting hot in here.
There it is. So we'll be broadcasting from one of the balls, and you've done an amazing job today.
Oh, thanks.
It's been great listening to your coverage all day, and we'll continue to listen to Greg at 10, live.
Greg, what do you got going on at 10?
I have Nellie from Little House on the Prairie.
I love Nellie.
You love Nellie, didn't you?
I love that show so much.
Yes, Nellie. Yeah, she'll be here to talk about what it was like on the prairie.
It wasn't this cold, though, Greg.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, it was.
We got a great show tonight. Walter Kern's going to be on Kennedy, where it's going to be live at Constitution Hall. Just a parting thought. I think this is this is just a great unifying day for everybody who really shared the risk. This is about millions of people who, volunteered their reputations, their livelihoods for a better life, a better America.
Money on the line.
Yep.
And so we're going to see a lot of changes tomorrow morning.
So that's when Steve Saylor first took Donald Trump seriously, when Donald Trump accepted Macy's no longer stocking his merchandise, and when various cable networks stopped doing deals with him after Donald Trump gave that speech in June of 2015 coming down the escalator. And when Saylor saw that Trump was willing to suffer financially for what he believed in, that he was willing to take the slings and arrows of opprobrium from our social betters, from the elites, from the news media, from New York Times and CBS News, and not back down. So it took about 3 weeks, about a month for Steve Saylor to take Trump seriously. It took me about 5 weeks to take Trump seriously. Laura Ingraham was one of the first people to take Donald Trump seriously, and also Ann Coulter. She was another person very early on was taking Trump seriously. Okay, let's see what Halperin has to say here.
Peace, love, and understanding is our mantra. If you're here on the always, as we say, use the opportunity to learn. If someone says something you disagree with, don't say that Halperin platform is horrible, because all that people come on and say stuff I don't agree with. Wonderful opportunity to learn from your fellow Americans or people around the world without rancor, and with the opportunity to question what's said and to engage in debate. So that's what we're doing. I'm glad you're part of it. If you'd like to be part of the question asking or comment making.
Okay, come on. So this is just the introductory portion, but two ways, not just Mark Halperin. So this is his platform. He's got big plans for it. And I enjoy watching him twice a day talk about politics. Maybe he's through with the PR section of the show now.
All right. Here's my best to tell you what's happening. The main motion of the day, of course, is Donald Trump being sworn in and all the pageantry around that. He's already given 3 or 4 speeches today, but he's about to give another one at the basketball arena in Washington, where the parade is, Capital One Arena. It's called, in the Chinatown area of Washington. The parade's been going on inside there. He's reportedly going to not just give a speech, but sign executive orders, like on stage, and explain them. There may be videos introducing the topics. I don't know if it's never happened in American history, but I don't remember it ever happening where the signing of the executive orders is not done like in the Oval Office with a few people standing around or no one. This is turning them into like theater and pageantry and using the crowd's emotion. If that's what they're doing, just from a professional point of view, it's kind of brilliant, right? You turn it from just signing a piece of paper into something that's fulfilling a campaign promise in front of enthusiastic people who liked when you made the promise. So
Immigration will be a big part of the signing of the executive orders, we know. I don't really know when he's going to sign the others. It's getting pretty late in the day, but in theory, signing some at the basketball arena and then some back at the White House in the Oval Office. For days, maybe really weeks, there's been all this debate, really weeks. What's going to be in the first round of tariffs? And it's some combination of disinformation, trying to throw reporters off, and I think disagreement about what to do. But my best sources and my spidey sense about Donald Trump has been, said this before, he doesn't really want tariffs. People are like when he says the most beautiful word in the English language is tariffs. That's not a tell that Trump's going to impose tariffs. To me, that's a tell that Trump's brandishing tariffs to get what he wants. There's no, Trump's not going to go down in history as a great president if he imposes a lot of tariffs, right? What he wants is to use the threat of tariffs to get other countries to do the bidding of the United States, to gain leverage in ways that other presidents have not. There's people in his economic orbit who think that tariffs managed correctly can inflict limited damage on the American economy and force change behavior, Europe, Asia, Latin America, right? In addition, one of the many reasons I was very skeptical of reports that there were going to be tariffs from the get-go is if there were tariffs, major tariffs imposed this week, the market could take a hit. It's like the last thing Donald Trump wants is for the market to take a hit on his watch. What he wants is for the market to explode so that he can say, see, now that I'm president, the market's going up. So one way to do that, if you're very manipulative and clever, is to leak out false disinformation that you're going to raise tariffs and then don't. And I think the markets would like that. So we shall see. I think he will say stuff about tariffs for sure, but it's basically going to be, let's study putting tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada, whoever. So we'll see. Haven't played out yet, but I've been, despite sources telling me directly, other people reporting they're going to be tariffs from the start. I've always been skeptical. Okay. Moving very fast here. And again, this is the dynamic to keep your eye on. This is a guy who's been president, had 4 years to think about it, and a team around him who said, we're not going to make the mistakes we made last time, and we're not going to start slow. It was, in some ways, the most active activist transition in modern times, and they're coming in with a clear plan, and they don't want to waste a day. And the personnel advantage that they have is massive in the sense that they picked people long ago, in some cases, to get started. I can't tell you if I could give one piece of advice to everyone who runs for president, it's, and I sometimes have said this to people running for president, don't be superstitious and fail to plan, and don't be a fool. Don't find people to plan your transition as early as possible, because if you wait because you don't have bandwidth or you're superstitious, you will risk your entire presidency if you win, because you're not prepared to hit the ground running and do all the things you need to do. Getting people confirmed, sorting out responsibilities, choosing amongst legislative priorities, figuring out how you're going to deal with Congress, all these things and many, many more can take time. Now, particularly if you're a new president, I can't tell you the levels of inefficiency in the Clinton administration, which is the first I covered. It's the only full time I've ever covered the White House. Their big thing, which is similar to the Trump people, similar to the Obama people, is we're not doing things the old way, right? And I would say I would watch as experienced White House correspondents who covered Reagan and Bush would say to Dee Myers and George Stephanopoulos, oh, the way you're doing it, that's not the way things are done here. And they would say, great, we're not doing things the way they were done here. That's what the Trump people did last time. And it's what they're doing this time. But the difference this time is they know more about what they're doing. They know where the bathrooms are. They know how the federal government works. And they're also infused with all these private sector people who could cause problems. We all know the complexities of that. But they're really infused with the notion of government does not work well. Let's figure out how to infuse this with the energy and practices and kind of rhythms of the private sector. All right. The White House staff is in place. Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and other in there. CBS News, my friend Jennifer Jacobs, on a tweet happened right before we went on, so I'm not sure I totally understand it. But it seems like they're reporting that the Kennedy Center, which is right near the White House, was used as kind of a staging ground so that the Trump people could walk in at noon and get to work, because there's a lot to do and they've got a battle plan to execute. So they're all in there working. Noah, do we have the Wall Street Journal story?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. All right. So the Wall Street Journal just ran a story a few minutes ago that I love. I love the color of all of this. Trump's Oval Office version 2.0. So again, Donald Trump, television producer, interior designer, builder. When you get to be president, you get to redo the Oval Office. What's the rug look like? What's on the walls? What art's in there? What family pictures? Trump gave the Wall Street Journal, his team gave the Wall Street Journal a preview of the new Oval Office. You can read the article if you're rich enough to have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal and see how this differs from what Biden had. But the single greatest detail in the article, and I say this objectively, not as someone addicted to Diet Coke, that they put back in on the first day the valet button that Trump can press. It's like a hotline, red line if you need a Diet Coke. Just press that button and they bring you a Diet Coke. I need one of those. That's in the story too, that they put the button back. So that's being done. The departments, Rubio on track to be confirmed today, Secretary of State. Pete Hegseth, once thought to be a dicey proposition, confirmed by the Senate Armed Services Committee, not confirmed yet on the floor. And the Armed Services Committee, with the exception of Joni Ernst, was seen as pretty safe for Hegseth, but that's a milestone. They've also done something, again, this is a great example of the benefits of their experience from 8 years ago. When you're waiting for the cabinet secretaries to be confirmed, someone has to be the acting head of the department. And 8 years ago, the Trump people did not, in every instance, like at the Justice Department, do as good a job as they would, as in retrospect, they would have liked to have done to make sure they have one of their people running the department temporarily. They published a list of names of people who are going to be temporarily running the department. I haven't had time to Google them all. Most of them are not names familiar to me. But what I can tell you, because I know what their goal was, is they found government employees, because the acting people, as I understand it, have to be existing government employees. You can't just put your friend in there temporarily. They don't work in the department. They found career people who are not, if you'll pardon the shorthand, deep staters. They found Trump loyalists to take over the departments temporarily. And, somebody like Bobby Kennedy or some of the others, it may take a while for them to be confirmed. And so you don't want to waste 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever it is, not having the department run the way you want it to run. And so you can look at that list and Google along with me later tonight. They found loyalists to do that, or at least they think they have. All right. Already talked about that. Yes, sir. Noah, were you saying something?
I was not, sorry.
Okay, all good. All right. Now, stand by with me for a minute, reading a note here. Okay. The pardons, the Biden pardons. The minute, I always thought he was going to pardon his family because the signs were there. And the body language when you ask people suggested he was. The minute it happened, my spidey sense said, there's going to be a pretty big reaction to this. And we talked about it on the morning meeting and inaugural coverage. The reaction's very strong, okay? It's very strong from a lot of Democrats. And Bill Daley is one of them. For those of you who don't know, he's from the Chicago Dailies. Brother and father were both mayor. He was Commerce Secretary in the Clinton administration. He was the chief of staff in the Obama administration and very close to Joe Biden. In fact, worked on Joe Biden's 1988 presidential campaign. And the people who worked on that campaign are part of kind of a club of people who are very close to the Bidens and the Biden family, Joe Biden and the Biden family. Bill Daley, I asked him this afternoon what he thought of the pardons, and he said they're disgusting. They seem to confirm what was said about the Biden family for the last 4 years. That's a very strong quote from a very close Biden ally, and he's not the only one. This morning, I heard almost immediately from someone equally prominent, maybe more prominent, no offense to Bill Daley, and very close to Joe Biden. So I always try to not overreact and assume that the news analysis or the gut feeling of the moment is going to be the enduring perception of something. But this seems to be problematic to a lot of people, including a lot of people on the far left, including a lot of Biden friends. They just kind of incredulous about these blanket pardons for his family members. And already the Republicans are talking about how they're going to deal with this. If they can't prosecute the Bidens, they want a thorough investigation. So as I said earlier today, this may put the Biden family in the crosshairs in a way they might not have been. All right. Still a lot of buzz about the inauguration event itself. We saw this morning in the tableau of the best seats, often commented on during the day, that the tech billionaires and Joe Rogan had better seats than the cabinet and then a lot of members of Congress. What we learned this afternoon, or later in the morning maybe, was that some people like Ron DeSantis and the governor of Texas weren't even in the event. They were in the overflow room. And this is an extraordinary situation. So some of the sights and scenes from the inauguration that people are talking about. First of all,
That's hilarious that the governor of Texas and the governor of Florida, there was no room for them at the inauguration. They were in the overflow room.
Number 2, please. Jeff Bezos not only got a good seat, he got to bring a date, his fiance, right? They didn't get married yet, right? Fiance, girlfriend, Lauren Sanchez.
Still engaged.
Yeah, still engaged. So there's Lauren Sanchez standing out amongst men wearing dark.
She's wearing lingerie.
Looks lovely to me, but there's some controversy over her outfit. I'm not going to show you all the things people are saying about it, but there's not everybody loved her outfit. Then number 5, something else people are still talking about is Melania's hat. There's yet another view of her hat. People like the hat a lot more than I think it's fair to say people like the hat more than they like the Sanchez outfit. All right. So I talked about the pardons and I talked about Democrats reacting to the pardons. Donald Trump took a few shouted questions from the media. I think he's going to take more questions from the media before Valentine's Day than Joe Biden took in the last 2 years from the media. I really do. He's feeling his oats. And of course, he loves to talk to the press. He was asked to comment on the Biden family pardons. And you might say uncharacteristically, he took a pass. Roll number 1, please.
Yeah, I was watching this in real time. I couldn't believe it.
I think it was unfortunate that he did that. We won't discuss it now. There's plenty of time to discuss it.
Thank you very much, guys.
So that's a Trump classic, right? To say it's unfortunate and there'll be more time to discuss it later, but also not a Trump classic in that he took a pass. I think that was an attempt to not pile on the Bidens or Joe Biden today. But I think it doesn't take a genius to know what he thinks about this, and you'll be hearing more about it. All right. So think back a million years ago when the conventional wisdom amongst the dominant media, the Democrats, and many Republicans was that there were 2 topics that Donald Trump should stay away from politically, because when he talked about them, they were very damaging to his prospects of winning. And in fact, some people went so far as to say, if Donald Trump talked about these items, he wouldn't win, that these were absolute barriers because they're very unpopular positions. 1, claiming the 2020 election was rigged, and 2, January 6th. And I mean, go look at the articles if you don't remember. This was considered gospel, that he had to talk about inflation and the border.
Okay, I want to tune into Fox News here. These hostage families? Yes. Right, so several Americans were held hostage by Hamas in Gaza for over a year. Okay, good on the Trump team for noticing and putting some emphasis on these people.
And then he could win or would win, but he couldn't talk about these things. Well, during the campaign, he continued to talk about them. He even talked about pardoning the J6 convicted criminals, but he won. And now, although as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet, he is expected to pardon, maybe not all, but many of those convicted for crimes connected to January 6th. And he's back talking about the rigged election. I said rigged in air quotes. Could you hear that in my voice? Roll number 6, please.
Yeah, he can't help saying stupid things.
2015, 2016, I talked about the border. And now I talked about the border, but this border is much worse. We fixed the border. It was totally fixed. There was nothing to talk about. 2020, by the way, that election was totally rigged, but that's okay.
Stupid.
It was a rigged election.
Terrible
You know,
thing
the
to
only
say.
thing good about it, it showed how bad they are, showed how incompetent, and frankly, historically, this is a much bigger event. If that would have gone like it should have, the bad thing about it is some bad things happened, like a lot of people in our country that wouldn't be in our country right now. So you know, that's the bad part.
Kind of incredible. And I mean, one of the lessons about Donald Trump that we should all remember is he says things and does things that would definitely be politically deadly for many politicians that are just not for him. And sometimes even they help him on balance. Part of why Democrats are so upset about the Biden pardons is it's going to be a lot harder to get the media and the public to care about the Trump pardons, number one.
Okay, let's see what Trump's saying.
As I leave, I'm going to the Oval Office and we'll be signing pardons for a lot of people, And thank you to Steve Witkoff. He's a great guy. He's a friend of mine. He's been a very successful man. He's a great negotiator. He's a wonderful guy. People love him. And he's got a tremendous power of persuasion. And that's what we need. We don't need stiffs. We got a lot of stiffs. You just had a whole load of them.
Yeah, it's incredible that Joe Biden didn't fire one person during his term.
And to the former hostages with us today, welcome. And welcome home. Some of the folks are former hostages. Not a good situation. The 3 young ladies that came home yesterday, you saw that. More coming home every day now. They're coming home. But they were hurt. One had her head blown off, fingers on her hand, and her hand indeed was blown off. She was trying to defend herself from a bullet being fired. Do you believe this? A bullet knocked off her hand. I don't know. You look at it, it's a disgrace. We never stopped praying for you, and we're so glad that you're reunited with your friends and families, and God bless you all. And some of them are just saying, no, my son is gone, but please just bring home his body. Right, Steve? Many of you have told me that your son is gone, but bring home his body. It should have never happened. 3 years, it's ridiculous. Should have never happened. Wouldn't have happened. I also want to express my tremendous gratitude to the hundreds of thousands of proud American patriots who came from all across.
Yeah, let's get a little more analysis here from Halperin.
Second, the 2020 election was not rigged in terms of ballots being stolen. But for a lot of Republicans, including people who come on this platform, what Mark Zuckerberg did, what some of the legislators did, changing the rules about related to COVID, and certainly the Hunter Biden matter and the 51 former intelligence officers, given how close the election was, there are a lot of Republicans who say those things changed the outcome. The suppression of the Hunter Biden story on social media, all the other things, those things changed the outcome. And some of them are comfortable saying that's a rigged election. It's the conflating of those things with the notion that election officials in cities stole ballots and created fake ballots. It's a conflating of those that is the outrage talking about this. But I'll say again, Donald Trump is not necessarily, well, put another way, if you were looking at history and saying past is prologue, you shouldn't say that talking about these things is going to keep him from having a successful presidency. I don't know why he's still talking about him. I don't know if he thinks it's important to the base or there's some intellectual obsession he has. I don't really know. All I know is it's frustrating if you're a journalist to want to hold him accountable for saying things that aren't true, that really have a negative impact on our country, because he's convinced a lot of people to believe things that aren't true, and about January 6th and about the election. But at the same time, again, this is why I say it's hard to cover Trump and to beat him in an election. We can't turn our lives into focusing on just those things. The New York Times today, in their initial characterization of the Trump inaugural speech, painted it as a very dark speech. And the headline they wrote, based on the totality of what he said, was every bit as tendentious and misleading as their coverage of him in 2016, during his presidency, and in 2020 and in 2024. Not a good sign as far as I'm concerned, because there was plenty of optimistic stuff in that speech, and to just paint it as dark, I think was a mistake, and one that frustrates me a little bit. Donald Trump is now speaking, flanked by families of some of the Israeli hostages at the event at the Capital One Arena. So let's dip into that a little bit and listen to what he's saying in his